Hey there, tonight we're diving into the brutal festivals of the ancient Romans. What you're about to discover is that gladiators weren't just for the Colosseum. Sometimes, the party was the real battlefield. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. We're standing in the heart of Rome, and the air is buzzing with the anticipation of tens of thousands of Romans crammed into the Circus Maximus, each one as hungry for entertainment as a lion is for lunch. Welcome to the Ludi Romani, where piety and pageantry collide with the force of a chariot crash. These games kicked off around 366 BC, originally as solemn religious rites, but like a toga party that gets way out of hand. What began as a nod to the gods turned into a full-blown spectacle that would make any Hollywood blockbuster look like a school play. At their core, the Ludi Romani were designed to honor Jupiter, the king of the gods, because if you didn't keep Jupiter happy, who knew what celestial havoc he might wreak? But as the years rolled on, the religious undertones took a backseat to the sheer pandemonium of the games. What started as a few days of worship ballooned into a 15-day extravaganza. And when I say extravaganza, I mean money poured in like wine at a bacchanalia. The cost of these games, absolutely staggering. We're talking thousands of sesterces, which, in today's money, would make a billionaire blink. In 55 BC, Julius Caesar himself shelled out an estimated 10 million sesterces on a single set of games. That's like burning through a small nation's GDP for the sake of public approval and a good show. Now let's talk logistics. Imagine organizing an event for over 250,000 people. That's the Circus Maximus for you, an enormous oval capable of holding the entire population of a small Roman city. Stretching 621 meters long and 150 meters wide. It was the ancient world's answer to a modern-day sports stadium, except instead of hot dogs, the concession stands probably sold spiced wine and roasted dormice. The setup required a small army of workers, from carpenters to caterers, each ensuring that every stone was in place and every vendor ready to hawk their wares. And if you think getting a front row seat was a breeze, think again. It's first come, first served. No ticket scalping here. So, you better hope your toga doesn't trip you up on your dash for a seat. While the Romans were certainly masters of excess, their love for spectacle was about more than just showing off. It was a way to keep the masses happy and distracted, a strategy known as bread and circuses. And boy, did they deliver on both fronts. Picture this: gladiatorial contests, beast hunts, and chariot races that could make modern NASCAR look tame. All of this was wrapped in a veneer of religious observance, because nothing says divine reverence like watching two men fight to the death, or a charioteer risk his life for a laurel crown. There was something undeniably magnetic about these events. The roar of the crowd as horses thundered by, the tension as two gladiators circled each other, the awe-inspiring sight of exotic beasts brought from the farthest reaches of the empire, all of it was intoxicating. But let's not kid ourselves. For all their splendor, these games were often more about politics than piety. Politicians and emperors used them as a tool to gain popularity and keep the populace in line. It was a simple equation. A well-entertained populace is a compliant one. And if you think the excess stopped there, oh, hold onto your laurel wreath. The sheer logistics of bringing in wild animals from Africa or importing the finest wines from Gaul shows the lengths to which Romans would go to impress. It was a bit like setting your money on fire, except with more animal trainers and fewer fire marshals. The games were a display of wealth and power, a reminder to every citizen of Rome's dominance over the world and the divine favor they supposedly enjoyed. Despite the glittering facade, there were darker realities lurking beneath. For the gladiators, it was often fight or die, and the animals didn't fare much better. But hey, why let a little death and destruction ruin a good time, right? The Romans were nothing if not pragmatic, and they had a knack for turning violence into a public spectacle par excellence. It's this blend of reverence and revelry, solemnity and spectacle, that made the Ludi Romani an unforgettable part of Roman life. So, as you sit there among the throng of spectators, savoring the chaos and pageantry, take a moment to ponder the irony. Here you are at a festival ostensibly dedicated to the gods, yet it feels more like a carnival of carnage. But maybe that's the point. In a world where life was as unpredictable as a chariot race, the games offered a cathartic release, a reminder that whether you're a senator or a slave, everyone loves a good show. But let's leave the chariots for a moment and dive headfirst into the arena of the gladiatorial games, where the stakes were as high as a senator's toga, and the drama could make a soap opera look like a weather report. You might think of these spectacles as the ultimate in ancient Roman entertainment, but they were much more than just a bloody pastime. They were political chess matches played out with swords and shields, and the stakes were the hearts and minds of the Roman populace. Picture this. You're one of those 50,000 or so spectators crammed into the Colosseum, that architectural marvel that could swallow up a modern sports stadium and still have room for dessert. The year is 107 AD, and Emperor Trajan is throwing a games festival that would make even the most lavish Super Bowl halftime show seem quaint. Over 123 days, a whopping 10,000 gladiators are set to clash in combat. That's like your local football team playing every single day for a third of the year, with a body count to boot. Contrary to popular belief, not every gladiator was a slave dragged from the dungeons to fight for their life. Sure, many were prisoners of war or criminals condemned to death, but some were free men who actually volunteered to enter the fray. Why, you ask? Well, for the fame and glory, of course. Imagine the adoration and celebrity status of a modern-day athlete, but instead of endorsement deals, they got a shot at freedom and possibly a villa or two. These gladiators were the rock stars of their age, complete with fan clubs and groupies. But unlike a rock concert, the stakes were life and death. The lucky few who survived the arena became household names, their likenesses plastered on frescoes and their exploits recited in taverns. Yet, the reality was far from glamorous. The life of a gladiator was brutal and short, with a diet that was more porridge than prime rib. Training was grueling, and the mortality rate was as high as the expectations of a Roman matron sizing up a potential suitor. Sure, the crowd loved a good bloodbath, but the games also served a more insidious purpose. They were a tool for emperors and politicians to curry favor with the masses. Forget campaign ads and baby kissing. Hosting a series of games was the ultimate way to win public affection. It was the ancient version of bread and circuses, keeping the populace entertained and, crucially, distracted from whatever political shenanigans were occurring off-stage. And let's not forget the economic engine these games powered. The logistics of staging such events were mind-boggling, from feeding and housing the gladiators to importing exotic beasts from as far as India and Africa. The costs soared into the millions of sesterces. The Romans poured money into entertainment like water into a leaky aqueduct, all to remind their citizens of the empire's vast reach and power. Yet, beneath the glittering veneer, there was a grim reality. Gladiators who survived were often maimed, their bodies a patchwork of scars and broken bones, and while the crowd might cheer for mercy, the final thumbs up or thumbs down rested with the editor of the games. A single gesture could determine life or death, a power as intoxicating as it was terrifying. For those in the stands, the games were a heady mix of spectacle and savagery. The roar of the crowd, the clang of steel, the dust and sweat. It was a sensory overload designed to captivate and control. And like modern sports fans, Romans formed factions and supported their favorites with a fervor that could rival any die-hard supporter today. Swap out the painted faces and foam fingers for togas and laurel wreaths, and you've got yourself a Saturday afternoon at the Colosseum. So, as you sit there, watching the drama unfold, it's worth pondering the irony. These games, ostensibly a display of Roman superiority and control, were also a reminder of the thin line between life and death. Yet, in the paradox of human nature, it was this very uncertainty that kept the crowds coming back. The promise of bloodshed was both horrific and irresistible, a spectacle that held a mirror to the society that craved it. And while we might like to think we've evolved beyond such brutal entertainment, just take a look at the latest action blockbuster or high-stakes sports match. The details have changed, sure, but the thrill of competition and the allure of danger remain timeless. So, as the dust settles on another day in the arena, remember, The games were more than just a fight for survival. They were a microcosm of the Roman world, reflecting its values, its excesses, and its insatiable appetite for the extraordinary. Speaking of spectacles that defy both logic and physics, let's shift gears, or should I say sails, to the Normatia, Rome's maritime madness. Imagine this. Ancient Roman engineers deciding that the grandeur of gladiators just wasn't cutting it anymore. Oh no, they needed to up the ante by turning their arenas into miniature lakes for full-scale naval battles. Because if there's one thing more entertaining than a chariot race, it's watching entire ships duke it out on a pond. Now, you might be wondering, how on earth did they manage to transform solid ground into a watery battleground? Well, it was no small feat. Think of it as the world's most ambitious home renovation project, but instead of ripping out a kitchen, they were essentially building a temporary ocean. The Colosseum, although famously used for other types of combat, wasn't the usual venue for these aquatic antics. No, for Emperor Augustus, this meant retrofitting arenas specifically designed for waterworks, like the famed Stagnum Augusti, a colossal basin engineered to host these spectacles. And what a logistical circus it was. First, you needed water, a lot of it. Aqueducts were rerouted, and entire reservoirs were drained to fill these colossal bathtubs. The sheer volume of water required was enough to make a Roman aqueduct engineer weep into his toga. Once the lake was ready, in came the ships. Actual ships, mind you, not some bathtub toys. We're talking about triremes and biremes, the warships of the ancient world, each one staffed with hundreds of real soldiers, not actors with water wings. So why go to such lengths? Why transform these arenas into maritime theaters at the cost of an emperor's ransom? The answer, predictably, lies in politics. Augustus wasn't just an emperor. He was Rome's ultimate showman, hell-bent on demonstrating his power and benevolence to the people. Throwing a grand Normatia wasn't just about the spectacle. It was about making a statement. It was Augustus's way of saying, look at my empire's might. I can command the seas to rise here in Rome. One of the most famous Normatia took place in 2 BC, when Augustus staged a mock battle between Greek and Persian ships on a basin that could hold up to 3,000 soldiers and rowers. The whole spectacle was a nod to historical battles, with the Romans presumably rooting for their ancient Greek allies against the Persians. It's like he was hosting the world's most elaborate history lesson, except with real lives on the line. And let's talk about those lives. Imagine being one of those soldiers, plucked from the Mediterranean fleet and told, hey, you're going to fight in a sea battle in the middle of Rome. The absurdity of it all. The men fought bravely, but let's not forget they were essentially gladiators with paddles, risking life and limb for Augustus's political theater. Sacrificing ships and men for a few hours of watery drama might sound insane, and you'd be right. But in a world where emperors were judged by their capacity to entertain and awe, sadly often took a backseat to spectacle. Of course, the audience loved it. Who wouldn't be enthralled by the sight of ships colliding, oars splintering, and soldiers leaping from deck to deck in a deadly dance? The roar of the crowd, the crash of waves against the arena's edge. It was sensory overload, an aquatic counterpart to the gladiatorial games that held Rome spellbound. Yet, for all its grandeur, the Normatia was also a stark reminder of imperial excess. The cost of staging such an event was astronomical, running into millions of sesterces, enough to fund a small army or, not drown parts of your city. But then again, the Romans were nothing if not extravagant. They might have had a penchant for practicality in their engineering feats, but when it came to entertainment, they threw caution and coin to the wind. It was all about keeping the populace dazzled and distracted. Give them a spectacle, and you've got their loyalty. Fail to entertain, and you're just another leader at risk of being forgotten or, worse, overthrown. So, as the sails unfurled and the mock battle raged on, the message was clear. Rome was invincible, its emperors godlike, and its capacity for spectacle unmatched. Beneath the splashes and shouts, though, was a truth that lingered like the scent of salt water in the amphitheater air. Rome's glory was as much about illusion as it was about reality. The Normatia, like the empire itself, were grand displays underpinned by human ambition and the ever-present shadow of mortality. Yet, just like any good show, the Normatia left the audience wanting more. More drama, more spectacle, more proof of Rome's supreme power. In a world where emperors were as much performers as they were rulers, the line between reality and performance blurred, leaving a legacy as enduring as the empire itself, a testament to human ingenuity, madness, and the timeless appetite for the extraordinary. As the waves from Rome's aquatic theatre recede, let's sail straight into the intoxicating chaos of Saturnalia, the festival where Roman society decided to turn itself upside down and inside out, because why not? Imagine a week-long spree where the rules were tossed out the window faster than a bad penny. It's a festival that makes a modern office party look like a sedate tea gathering in comparison. Now, Saturnalia started as a day-long shindig on December 17th, dedicated to Saturn, the god of agriculture. But like any good party, it was far too much fun to keep short, so it stretched into a week by the late Republic era. Picture this. For 7 days, the social hierarchy was flipped like a pancake. Slaves suddenly found themselves dining alongside their masters, and roles were reversed in a way that would make even the most progressive modern HR manager blush. Public drunkenness wasn't just accepted, it was practically mandatory. Romans were known to don festive garments called synthesis, because who needs a toga when you're planning to party like there's no tomorrow? And speaking of party games, one of the most popular traditions was the election of a king of Saturnalia, often a slave or lowly citizen chosen to preside over the revelry with absurd commands. Think of it as a cross between a class clown and a CEO for a day, with all the mischief that entails. If you think this sounds like the Roman precursor to Christmas, you're in for a surprise. Sure, early Christians co-opted the date and some customs like gift-giving, but let's be clear. Saturnalia was more spring break than Silent Night. It was an excuse for unrestrained hedonism, in stark contrast to the reflective and spiritual aspects that came to define Christmas. Economically, it was a chance to splurge. Everyone, from the wealthiest patrician to the humblest plebeian, exchanged gifts, often inexpensive trinkets called sigillaria, or small clay figurines. This was less about the gifts themselves, and more about the gesture, a nod to equality, however fleeting. In a city where social status was everything, this temporary leveling of the playing field was both a relief and a pressure valve, a reminder that empathy and kinship transcended class lines, if only for a few days. Politically, Saturnalia was a masterstroke of social engineering. Just as the games served to distract the populace, Saturnalia allowed for controlled chaos, a time for the populace to let off steam without challenging the status quo. The powers that be understood that a little temporary misrule was a small price for maintaining long-term order. After all, a happy, intoxicated crowd was less likely to revolt. But don't be fooled by the festive veneer. While Saturnalia gave slaves a taste of freedom, it was more of a temporary illusion than a genuine shake-up of societal structures. Once the festival wrapped up, social norms snapped back into place faster than a rubber band. Still, the festival's enduring appeal speaks to a universal truth. Everyone loves a good break from routine. It's the ancient equivalent of a treat-yourself day, but with more wine and fewer consequences. The myth of Saturnalia as a quaint precursor to Christmas is, well, a myth. This wasn't about exchanging gifts around a cozy fire. It was about dancing around a bonfire of societal norms with reckless abandon. So next time you're at an office holiday party, take a cue from Saturnalia. Maybe skip the toga, but don't forget to let loose a little. After all, sometimes the best way to appreciate structure is to step outside of it, even if just for a moment. As we leave behind the merry mayhem of Saturnalia, remember that beneath its surface lay a profound commentary on human nature. Inverting the social order for a week was a reminder that roles are often just roles, and beneath them were more alike than different. The Romans, in their wisdom and folly, understood this duality, embracing it with a fervor that echoed through the ages. It's a testament to their love of spectacle and their understanding of the human condition, a festival that, despite its chaos, offered a glimpse of equality in a world defined by hierarchy. With that, let's brace ourselves for the next chapter of Roman revelry, where we'll dive into the empire's more bizarre and lesser-known festivals, each one a window into the complexities of a civilization that, like us, was always looking for an excuse to party. Now, as we leave the merry mayhem of Saturnalia and the dizzying whirl of Roman festivals behind, let's turn our gaze to the slow unraveling of these grand spectacles. Rome, for all its might and majesty, was not immune to the ravages of time and change. By the 4th century AD, the empire was feeling the pinch, economically, politically, and spiritually. The lavish games and feasts that once symbolized Roman power and prosperity were starting to look a bit like a college student's credit card statement, unsustainable and increasingly absurd. Economic pressures were mounting faster than a charioteer on a victory lap. Rome's expansive empire was a double-edged sword. It brought wealth, but also staggering costs. Maintaining the legions, feeding the populace, and funding those infamous games was burning through the treasury like a wildfire in a wheat field. By the time Emperor Diocletian took the throne in 284 AD, he was facing a financial crisis that would make modern budget cuts look like pocket change. Diocletian's response was to overhaul the tax system and attempt to stabilize the economy with radical reforms, like setting price controls, a move that, unsurprisingly, was about as popular as a lead balloon. Meanwhile, the political landscape was shifting like sand dunes in a desert storm. Rome's emperors were no longer the undisputed rock stars of the ancient world. Power struggles, civil wars, and the constant threat of barbarian invasions left the empire in a perpetual state of high alert. The games, once a symbol of imperial grandeur, became a luxury that fewer emperors could afford. The days of Augustus's Normatia, where entire fleets battled in artificial lakes, now seemed as distant as a sunset on the horizon. The rise of Christianity was the final nail in the coffin for many of these pagan festivals. As the new religion spread like wildfire, its adherents found the blood-soaked spectacles of the past increasingly distasteful. Emperor Constantine, the first Roman emperor to convert to Christianity, began to curtail the games in the early 4th century. By 325 AD, he had banned gladiatorial combat altogether, although the practice lingered in some corners of the empire like an unwanted guest at a long-over party. Christianity's ascent didn't just change the calendar, it altered the very fabric of Roman society. Pagan rituals and blood sports gave way to new forms of celebration, ones that emphasized spiritual reflection over physical prowess. The grandiose days of the Ludi Romani were slowly replaced by more subdued gatherings, with prayers and hymns taking the place of chariots and gladiators. It was like swapping a rock concert for a meditative yoga retreat, not everyone's cup of spiced wine, but a sign of the times nonetheless. Yet, even as the empire's fortunes faded, the legacy of Rome's festivals endured, like the echo of a distant thunderclap. The grandeur and spectacle of the games left an indelible mark on the world, influencing everything from the way we build stadiums to how we view public entertainment. Modern sports, with their roaring crowds and iconic venues, owe a debt to the ancient arenas where Romans once gathered in their thousands, united in the thrill of competition and the drama of the spectacle. And while we may shake our heads at the brutality of the gladiatorial games or the excesses of Augustus's Normatia, there's something undeniably human in the Romans' quest to celebrate life in all its chaotic glory. Their festivals were a reflection of their world, a world that was brutal and brilliant, absurd and awe-inspiring, much like our own. In their revelry and their rituals, the Romans captured the essence of the human condition, our ability to find joy in the midst of chaos, to seek meaning in the face of mortality. As we close the curtain on Rome's festival of festivals, let's not forget the lessons they taught us. The Romans may have danced on the edge of excess, but they understood the power of spectacle to unite, to entertain, and to distract. In their world, where life was as unpredictable as a gladiator's duel, the games were a reminder that, for all our differences, we share a common hunger for connection and celebration. So, the next time you find yourself in a stadium or a theater, surrounded by the roar of the crowd and the thrill of the performance, spare a thought for our ancient counterparts. They too sat in rapt attention, eyes wide with wonder, hearts pounding with anticipation, as they bore witness to the spectacle of human endeavor. In the end, the story of Rome's festivals is a story about us all, our dreams, our desires, and our enduring quest to make sense of a world that's as unpredictable as it is enchanting. And if there's one thing the Romans taught us, it's that sometimes, amidst the chaos and the carnage, there's beauty to be found in the brilliance of the show. When Michiko Shoda was born in 1934, Japan was a nation sitting on the edge of its own contradictions, a place where ancient traditions were being jostled by the fast-forward craze of modernity. As a child in post-war Japan, Michiko grew up amid rubble and resilience. The country was swapping its imperial armor for a more democratic wardrobe, and Michiko was going to have a front-row seat to this transformation, though she probably didn't know it yet as she played hopscotch with her brothers on the cracked sidewalks of Tokyo. Her father, Hitsuburo Shoda, was a successful businessman, which meant the family was well off, but not exactly rolling in imperial gold coins. They were like the middle-class heroes in a nation ready for a serious comeback tour. Michiko's education was as prestigious as it was progressive. She attended the Sacred Heart School, where the emphasis was on creating well-rounded individuals rather than just well-mannered society ladies. This was a breeding ground for future leaders, not just future wives, and the curriculum was as rigorous as it was revolutionary for young women at the time. Picture this: Latin conjugations, philosophy debates, and of course, tennis. It was here that Michiko honed the skills that would let her catch the eye of a certain crown prince on a tennis court, but that's a story for a few paragraphs down the line. Now, let's talk about post-war Japan's social landscape. In the 1950s, Japan was busy trying to become the world's most efficient phoenix, rising from the ashes of war with an industrial boom that would make even the most ambitious Silicon Valley startup blush. As factories hummed, the social norms were also being reassembled. Women were increasingly stepping into roles beyond the traditional homemaker, thanks in part to education systems like Sacred Heart that weren't afraid to push the envelope. Yet, despite these new opportunities, the idea of a commoner marrying into the imperial family was about as likely as a snowstorm in July. Enter Michiko. The year was 1957, and the setting was the ultimate stage for romance. A tennis court, in an era where love stories were born from the pages of magazines rather than the swipes on a screen. The meeting between Michiko Shoda and Crown Prince Akihito was spun into a Cinderella tale faster than you can say royal wedding. The media, with its ever-romanticized lens, painted Michiko as the humble commoner whose grace and charm won the heart of a prince. But let's pop that bubble a bit, shall we? While the story made for great headlines, it was more an intersection of social progress and royal necessity than a fairy godmother's doing. In reality, Michiko was anything but a pauper. Her family was well established, with a father who had more connections than a social media influencer. Meanwhile, the imperial family was eager to modernize its image, and what better way to do that than by letting a commoner into its gilded gates? It was a strategic move wrapped in a love story, and Michiko and Akihito became the poster couple for Japan's new era, whether they liked it or not. Their engagement was announced in 1958, and the nation, still recovering from the devastation of war, found something to celebrate. The wedding took place on April 10, 1959, and millions tuned in to watch a live broadcast, the first of its kind in Japan, a technological marvel at the time. But let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't just about love conquering all. The marriage was a carefully orchestrated step toward a more relatable monarchy, a strategic pivot from the shadows of Japan's imperial past to a brighter, more democratic dawn. Michiko, with her commoner roots and educated mind, was the ideal candidate for this role. And so, she stepped into the limelight, not just as Akihito's wife, but as a symbol of a Japan that was ready to embrace change while still holding onto the essence of its identity, a balancing act that would define her role as Empress in the years to come. As Michiko married into the imperial family, she faced challenges that would make anyone want to crawl under a futon and hide. The palace, with its labyrinthine corridors and ancient protocols, was as welcoming as a haunted house. Her mother-in-law, Empress Karjan, wasn't exactly the warm, fuzzy type. Imagine more ice queen than doting matriarch. Michiko, however, was nothing if not resilient. She navigated these hurdles with the same grace she had shown on the tennis court, while the public watched her every move through a magnifying glass. Yet, behind the fairy tale narrative, Michiko was blazing a trail. She was the first commoner to become Empress, and she wasn't about to let the weight of tradition crush her spirit. She brought a breath of fresh air to the imperial household, often breaking with protocol in small but significant ways. She did her own sharping, gasp, and insisted on raising her children with a hands-on approach, something unheard of in the royal playbook. These were small steps, perhaps, but they marked the beginning of a quiet revolution within the palace walls. So, why does all this matter? Because Michiko's story is not just about a woman marrying a prince. It's about a nation finding new ways to honor its past while embracing the future. It's about the power of education and the importance of adaptability. And perhaps most importantly, it's a reminder that even in the most structured of systems, change is possible when someone is brave enough to step up to the net and serve. Michiko's journey from commoner to Empress wasn't exactly a walk in the Imperial gardens. It was more like a tightrope act over a pit of historical vipers. She had to navigate the kind of strict traditions that made a Victorian boarding school look like summer camp. The Imperial Household Agency, known for its legendary adherence to protocol, was about as flexible as a steel beam. Michiko was expected to transform from a lively, independent woman into a serene, near-mythical figurehead overnight. No pressure, right? Let's talk about her wardrobe, because the media certainly couldn't stop. Imagine having every outfit you wear become a national discussion. The press had a field day with Michiko's fashion choices, scrutinizing everything from her hats to her handbags. But Michiko had a knack for turning clothes into silent speeches. Her choice to wear Western-style dresses was both a nod to modernization and a subtle rebellion against the traditional kimono-clad image of Japanese royalty. This wasn't just about looking chic. It was a statement of a new era, a sartorial mic drop, if you will. Yet, not everyone was applauding. Critics, stuck in a time capsule, accused her of disrespecting Japanese tradition. The irony here: her fashion choices did more to influence Japanese women than 1,000 proclamations from the imperial throne. She became a symbol of sophistication, blending East and West in a way that made style a diplomatic endeavor. In a country where appearances were a serious business, Michiko was setting trends and challenging norms, all while under the watchful eye of a nation. As if navigating the fashion police wasn't enough, Michiko also had to contend with the relentless paparazzi. Japanese media in the 1960s was as hungry as a sumo wrestler at an all-you-can-eat buffet. They followed her everywhere, hoping to catch a glimpse of a misstep or a moment of imperfection. But Michiko was no stranger to playing the long game. She handled them with the deftness of a chess grandmaster, offering just enough of a smile or wave to satisfy their need for a story, yet keeping her private life under wraps like a secret recipe. Motherhood only upped the ante in this high-stakes game of public relations. When Michiko became a mother, the pressure wasn't just on her to raise heirs. She had to do it under the microscope of public scrutiny. Raising Crown Prince Naruhito and his siblings was no ordinary parenting gig. The world expected her to be the perfect mother, a role model for all Japanese women, and of course, to do it all with grace. Spoiler alert, the grace part wasn't always easy. In a palace where the rules were set in stone tablets, Michiko dared to break new ground by insisting on personally raising her children. No nannies, thank you very much. This hands-on approach was a revolutionary act within the imperial household. Historically, royal children were raised by a cadre of nannies and tutors, while their parents waved at them from a distance. Michiko's decision to change this dynamic was seen as radical, even rebellious. She believed that being a mother meant being present, and she wasn't about to let a bunch of dusty old protocols tell her how to raise her kids. Her choice resonated with many modern Japanese mothers, who were also juggling tradition and modernity like circus performers balancing spinning plates. But let's not sugarcoat it. This new approach wasn't entirely welcomed within the palace walls. It ruffled feathers and raised eyebrows. Some insiders felt her actions were a break from established norms that threatened the very fabric of imperial life. Yet, Michiko's persistence in redefining motherhood in the imperial family showed that sometimes the most profound revolutions start in the nursery. All these challenges took a toll on Michiko. By the late 1960s, the pressure cooker of royal life had led to a series of stress-induced health issues. The media's relentless scrutiny and the unyielding expectations placed upon her were no small bumps in the road. Imagine living in a glass house where everyone has a rock in hand. It was a testament to Michiko's resilience that she continued to fulfill her duties despite these struggles. Her experience shone a harsh light on the realities of living a life where every gesture, every smile, every sigh was dissected by the public and press alike. In many ways, Michiko's story is a reflection of Japan's own journey, a nation balancing the weight of its traditions with the demands of a rapidly modernizing world. Her transition into imperial life wasn't just about personal adaptation. It was a mirror to a society grappling with its identity. This tension between past and future, between duty and self, is what makes her story so compelling. As we move forward in Michiko's tale, it becomes clear that her life wasn't just a collection of royal duties and public appearances. It was a masterclass in navigating the complexities of change, an example of how one woman's quiet resilience could ripple through an entire nation. Stay tuned, because the story of Empress Michiko is far from over. And so, as Michiko navigated the tightrope of imperial life, she became a modernizing force within the imperial palace, like a breath of fresh air in a room full of dusty relics. Picture this: the imperial family, steeped in centuries-old traditions, suddenly being redefined by a woman who believed that the past and present could coexist in harmony. It was a balancing act worthy of a Cirque du Soleil performer, but Michiko had the grace and tenacity to pull it off. As Empress, Michiko's influence wasn't just about shaking up fashion norms or parenting techniques. She had her sights set on something far more profound. She understood that the role of the emperor and empress wasn't just ceremonial, it was symbolic. And symbols, as we know, have the power to inspire change. One of Michiko's most significant contributions was her emphasis on humanitarian work. Now, you might be thinking, isn't that just a fancy way of saying charity galas and ribbon-cutting ceremonies? Not quite. Michiko's approach to humanitarianism wasn't about photo ops or public relations. It was about fostering genuine connections with the people of Japan, particularly those who felt marginalized by the rapid changes sweeping the country. In the 1960s and 70s, Japan was experiencing economic growth at warp speed. Picture a bullet train, except it's the economy, and it's leaving behind anyone who can't keep up. While the nation was busy building skyscrapers and expanding its industrial might, Michiko turned her attention to the softer side of development, the human element. She visited hospitals, schools, and disaster-stricken areas, often without the pomp and circumstance typically associated with royal visits. Her visits were not just symbolic gestures, but were aimed at understanding the real issues facing ordinary people. In 1966, Michiko visited the island of Okinawa, a place with a history as turbulent as a typhoon season. Okinawa had been under U.S. administration since the end of World War II and was only returned to Japan in 1972. Michiko's visit was a delicate political dance. She was there to acknowledge the struggles of the Okinawan people, but also to remind them that they were an integral part of Japan's future. If ever there was a moment to wield the soft power of empathy, this was it. Her visit was a masterstroke in diplomacy, showing that sometimes a kind word and a listening ear can bridge gaps that politics cannot. But let's not ignore the elephant, and by elephant, I mean the political minefield, in the room. The imperial family, while not directly involved in politics, exists in a space where every move can have political implications. Michiko had to navigate these treacherous waters with the dexterity of a seasoned diplomat. Her speeches often carried subtle messages advocating for social progress, cleverly wrapped in the language of tradition. It was like hiding a vitamin in a piece of chocolate cake, palatable to everyone, but undeniably good for you. Take, for instance, her emphasis on education and gender equality. In a society where gender roles were as rigid as a sumo wrestler's stance, Michiko's encouragement of women's education was a quiet revolution. She didn't proclaim it from the rooftops, but integrated it into her public speeches and actions, gently nudging the nation toward a more equitable future. Her message was clear. Educating women was not just about personal empowerment, it was about national progress. In 1975, Michiko accompanied Emperor Akihito on a tour of Europe, a whirlwind diplomatic mission designed to strengthen Japan's international relations. During this trip, Michiko's charm and intelligence were on full display. She engaged with foreign dignitaries, not just as a figurehead, but as an equal partner in dialogue. Her fluency in English and French honed during her years at the Sacred Heart School, was a diplomatic asset. The trip was a resounding success, solidifying Japan's image as a modern, forward-thinking nation on the global stage. Despite these achievements, Michiko's journey wasn't without its challenges. Inside the palace walls, there were those who viewed her modernizing influence with suspicion. Change, after all, can be a scary prospect, especially when it threatens to upend centuries of tradition. Yet Michiko persisted, her quiet determination a testament to the power of resilience. By the 1980s, Japan was an economic powerhouse, boasting a GDP that put it on par with the United States. But with great power comes great responsibility, and the Imperial family was expected to reflect the nation's newfound status. Michiko understood that with Japan's global influence came an increased need for cultural diplomacy. She used her role to promote Japanese culture abroad, participating in international events and showcasing Japan's rich heritage with pride. Her efforts helped to humanize the Imperial family, transforming them from distant deities into relatable figures on the world stage. And let's not forget her speeches, those masterclasses in subtlety and nuance. Michiko had an uncanny ability to address contentious social issues without ever straying into overtly political territory. Her words were like finely crafted haikus, each one layered with meaning, leaving listeners with plenty to ponder. She spoke of peace, understanding, and the importance of cultural exchange, always with an eye toward the future. In 1990, when Akihito ascended to the chrysanthemum throne, Michiko became the first empress in modern history to attend the enthronement ceremony, a testament to the changing times. Her presence was more than just symbolic. It was a nod to the evolving role of women in Japanese society. The ceremony was watched by millions, both in Japan and around the world, and Michiko's poised presence sent a clear message. Tradition and progress could walk hand in hand. Michiko's life, like a finely woven tapestry, was a blend of old and new, tradition and innovation. Her story is one of transformation, not just of an individual, but of a nation. She showed that even within the confines of the most rigid structures, change is possible. It may start with a single step, a quiet act of defiance, or a gentle word of encouragement. But with time, these small actions can create ripples that echo through history. As we continue this journey through Michiko's life, it's clear that her legacy is not just one of royalty and duty, but of courage and compassion. She brought humanity to the heart of the Imperial family, challenging norms and inspiring others to do the same. And in doing so, she left an indelible mark on the tapestry of Japan's history. Stay tuned, because the story of Empress Michiko is a testament to the power of quiet revolution and the enduring strength of the human spirit. As we dive deeper into Michiko's story, it's essential to acknowledge the toll her role took on her well-being, a reminder that even a seemingly charmed life can have its shadows. By the late 1980s, Michiko had become the face of Japan's modern monarchy, but the relentless pressure of being in the public eye had its consequences. Her health scares weren't just tabloid fodder. They were the smoke signals of a life lived under immense scrutiny. In 1993, Michiko experienced a stress-related health crisis that momentarily left her unable to speak. Yes, you heard that right. The Empress, whose every word was analyzed like a diplomatic communique, found herself voiceless. It was as if her body decided to stage a sit-in protest against the demands placed upon her. This incident wasn't just a personal struggle. It was a wake-up call for a nation that had long viewed mental health through a lens clouded by stigma. Let's put this in context. Japan, at the time, was a country where mental health discussions were about as welcome as a typhoon during cherry blossom season. The idea that someone of Michiko's stature could be affected by stress-related illness was both shocking and enlightening. It highlighted the immense pressure cooker environment of the Imperial family, where maintaining a perfect facade was as crucial as performing the actual duties of the throne. Public sympathy for Michiko soared following her health scare. People began to see her not just as an empress, but as a human being navigating the harsh realities of an unyielding public life. This empathy was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it fostered a more open conversation about the mental health challenges faced by those in high-pressure roles. On the other, it underscored the isolation she felt within the very institution she was meant to symbolize. The Japanese public, previously accustomed to viewing the imperial family as untouchable figures, started to acknowledge the human aspects of their royals. Michiko's vulnerability made her relatable, a mirror reflecting the universal struggle of balancing personal health with professional obligations. This was a pivotal moment for Japan, nudging the country toward acknowledging mental health as an integral part of overall well-being. Within the palace walls, however, the narrative was more complex. The Imperial Household Agency, notorious for its stringent conservatism, wasn't exactly equipped to handle such modern issues. They were more used to dealing with ceremonial kimonos and state banquets than the intricacies of mental health support. Michiko's condition forced a traditionally rigid institution to reconsider its approach to the emotional and psychological welfare of its members. Michiko's experience also prompted a subtle shift in how mental health was perceived in the broader Japanese society. It was like the first crack in a dam, suggesting that even the most stoic of facades could harbor unseen struggles. Suddenly, it wasn't just acceptable, but necessary to discuss stress and mental health openly. The conversation began to permeate through various layers of society, slowly dismantling the stigma that had long shrouded mental health issues in silence. The economic context of this period is worth noting too. Japan was grappling with the aftermath of the asset price bubble burst, the so-called lost decade of the 1990. While the economy was doing impressions of a yo-yo, fluctuating between false recoveries and deeper slumps, the personal struggles of someone like Michiko became a potent symbol for a nation wrestling with its identity. Her health issues seemed to echo the societal pressures felt by many Japanese who were also navigating the uncertainties of a rapidly changing world. In the years that followed, Michiko continued to advocate for mental health awareness, albeit in a characteristically understated way. She didn't become the poster child for mental health reform, but her own experiences did much to soften societal attitudes toward the topic. Japan began to take baby steps toward better mental health care, though the journey was anything but straightforward. The Empress's quiet struggle was a reminder that beneath the regal exterior lay a person grappling with the same pressures and vulnerabilities as anyone else. Her resilience in the face of adversity became a beacon, subtly encouraging a nation to reevaluate its priorities. Michiko's story during this period is a testament to the power of vulnerability, demonstrating that even the most revered figures can face their own battles behind closed doors. It was a lesson in empathy wrapped in the guise of a royal health crisis, and it left an indelible mark on how Japan viewed its royals, and more broadly, how it viewed the importance of mental health. As we continue to unravel Michiko's life, it's clear that her legacy is as much about her personal courage as it is about her public duties. Her health scares, while deeply personal, had far-reaching implications, sparking conversations that continue to resonate today. So keep your ears perked and your minds open, because the tale of Empress Michiko is far from over, and the next chapter promises to be just as compelling. As Michiko gracefully stepped into her role as Empress Emerita, she didn't just fade into the background like an antique in a dusty corner of the palace. Instead, she evolved into a symbol of enduring strength and quiet revolution. Her legacy, cast in the long shadows of the chrysanthemum throne, is as multifaceted as a meticulously cut diamond, reflecting not just her personal journey, but the broader evolution of Japanese society and its monarchy. Let's start with the numbers, because who doesn't love a good data point? Michiko's tenure as Empress spanned 1990 to 2019, a solid 29 years during which Japan underwent seismic shifts. We're talking technological booms, economic ebbs and flows, and social transformations that would make even the most seasoned anthropologists head spin. In this dynamic context, Michiko's influence was like a steady hand on the tiller, steering the imperial family through waters that were as unpredictable as they were exciting. Her impact on the imperial family was both profound and personal. For starters, she broke the mold of the traditional, silent empress by becoming a voice of compassion and modernity. Her approach to motherhood, hands-on and deeply involved, didn't just raise eyebrows, it raised the bar. Her children, including the current Emperor Naruhito, were brought up with an understanding of both their heritage and the world beyond palace walls. It's no coincidence that Naruhito, in his own reign, has continued to emphasize the importance of mental health and international relations, themes that his mother championed decades earlier. Michiko's commitment to blending tradition with modernity extended beyond her family to Japanese society as a whole. In a land where the past is always present, think ancient shrines nestled among futuristic skyscrapers, she became an icon of balance. Her public engagements, whether visiting disaster-stricken areas or attending cultural events, were not just about showing face. They were about showing heart. By the time she became Empress Emerita in 2019, Michiko had attended over 600 official engagements, each a testament to her belief in the power of presence. Yet, let's not sugarcoat it. The role of Empress Emerita wasn't just about sipping tea and reminiscing about the good old days. It came with its own set of expectations and pressures. The Japanese society, with its penchant for respect and reverence, viewed Michiko as a touchstone of continuity and change. Her ability to navigate this delicate balance was nothing short of masterful. She continued to influence public discourse, albeit from a more subdued platform, championing issues like women's education and cross-cultural exchange. Her popularity, even as Empress Emerita, was no fluke. It was the result of decades of carefully cultivated relationships with the people of Japan. Michiko had an uncanny ability to resonate with the masses, not through grand gestures, but through genuine empathy. A 2018 survey revealed that she was one of the most beloved figures in Japan, with approval ratings higher than many contemporary politicians. Not bad for someone whose job description didn't exactly include winning over public opinion. But why does Michiko's story resonate so deeply? The answer lies in her embodiment of Japan's own duality, an ancient culture navigating the challenges of a fast-paced modern world. Her life is a testament to the power of adaptability, a lesson in how to honor the past while not being shackled by it. Michiko showed that tradition and innovation aren't mutually exclusive, but can be woven together like the intricate patterns of a kimono. Let's tackle a myth, shall we? The romanticized view of Michiko's life as a fairy tale might sell tabloids, but it glosses over the grit and determination that defined her journey. Her story wasn't just about marrying a prince and living happily ever after. It was about challenging the status quo, often in subtle yet significant ways. Whether it was her choice of fashion, her approach to parenting, or her advocacy for social issues, Michiko consistently pushed the boundaries of what was expected of an empress. In contemplating Michiko's legacy, we can't ignore the economic undercurrents that shaped her era. Her reign coincided with Japan's post-war economic miracle and its subsequent struggles, including the notorious Lost Decade. Through it all, Michiko's emphasis on cultural diplomacy and education underscored a vision for Japan that transcended mere economic metrics. She understood that true progress wasn't just about GDP, but about the societal values that underpin it. As Japan continues to grapple with 21st century challenges, aging population, economic shifts, and technological advancements, Michiko's legacy offers a blueprint for navigating these complexities. Her life teaches us that resilience isn't about resisting change, but about embracing it with grace. In a world often fixated on the next big thing, Michiko's story is a reminder of the enduring power of subtle transformation. In the grand tapestry of history, Michiko's thread is one of quiet strength and subtle defiance. She reshaped the narrative of Japan's monarchy, transforming it from a symbol of static tradition into a dynamic institution capable of evolving with the times. Her influence extends beyond the palace walls, touching the lives of ordinary Japanese citizens and inspiring future generations to balance tradition with modernity. As we wrap up this journey through the life of Empress Michiko, it's clear that her legacy is not just a chapter in Japan's history, but a living testament to the power of empathy, adaptability, and quiet revolution. She showed us that even within the most rigid systems, change is possible, and that sometimes the most profound transformations begin with a single, graceful step. So, as you drift off to sleep tonight, let Michiko's story remind you that history is not just about the past, it's about the possibilities of the future. Somewhere along the sun-kissed Mediterranean shores, where the sea sparkles like a freshly opened can of soda, a civilization emerged that would make even the most seasoned pirate say, "Aye, there be some serious competition." Enter the Phoenicians, the ancient maritime maestros who turned the Mediterranean into their personal playground. And no, they didn't call themselves Phoenicians. That's a Greek name. They were a collection of city-states, the rock stars of antiquity, with headliners like Tyre and Sidon taking center stage. Think of them as the ultimate ancient startup, hustling on the high seas with a business model that would make any modern CEO nod in approval. Nestled along the stretch of coastline that is today's Lebanon, northern Israel, and parts of Syria, the Phoenicians occupied some prime real estate, if your main interests were rocks and sea. The land itself wasn't exactly a farmer's dream. Limited arable land meant that if you wanted to make a living, you'd better learn to love the ocean. And boy, did they. With their backs to the arid hills and their toes in the water, they became master shipbuilders out of sheer necessity. When life gives you lemons, make lemonade. When life gives you coastline, build a fleet. But let's not get carried away by the romantic notion of the Phoenicians as solitary seafarers, bravely venturing into the unknown. Their maritime expertise wasn't so much born out of wanderlust as it was a response to cold, hard realities. With rocky soil refusing to yield crops and neighboring empires eyeing their land like a hungry cat eyes a plump mouse, the sea offered both refuge and opportunity. So they took to the waves with gusto and a little bit of desperation. Now, about those ships. The Phoenicians were reputed to be the best shipbuilders around, a title they wore with the same pride as a kid wearing a new pair of sneakers on the first day of school. They built their vessels from the sturdy cedars of Lebanon, trees so famous that they got a shout-out in the Bible. These ships weren't just floating logs, they were engineering marvels. The Phoenicians devised something called the galley, a ship powered by both sails and oars, which made them the speed demons of their time. If there had been a nautical Grand Prix, the Phoenicians would have been the Lewis Hamiltons of the ancient world. Let's tackle the purple dye myth while we're at it. Everyone loves a good origin story, and for the Phoenicians, it's all about that legendary Tyrian purple. This dye was more exclusive than a VIP pass to an A-list party and worth its weight in gold, literally. It came from the murex snail, a creature that looks like it was designed by a committee of horror movie directors. Extracting the dye was a labor-intensive process that involved harvesting thousands of snails, which then had to be left to rot in the sun. The smell. Let's just say it was the ancient version of industrial pollution. Romantic? Hardly. Lucrative? Absolutely. The dye's production was so costly and time-consuming that only the elite could afford it. Imagine walking into a room wearing a purple robe. Instant status upgrade. It was an ancient flex, a way to say, I've got money, and I'm not afraid to stink for it. And while the Phoenicians might not have been the only ones making purple dyes, they certainly cornered the market in a way that would make any modern monopolist proud. But back to the city-states. Tyre and Sidon were the Bay-and-Say and Jay-Z of the ancient maritime world, each powerful in its own right, but nearly unstoppable together. Tyre was the island fortress, a place so well defended that even Alexander the Great had to get creative to conquer it. Meanwhile, Sidon was the more laid-back sibling, famous for its glass production and a hub of trade and culture. These city-states weren't just about ships and snails, though. They were bustling centers of trade, with goods flowing in and out like a never-ending conveyor belt. They dealt in everything from timber and wine to textiles and luxury items. The Phoenicians were like the Amazon of their day, except instead of drones, they had ships, and instead of prime delivery it was more like, it gets there when it gets there. Culturally, the Phoenicians were like the cool kids who influenced everyone else. They spread the first alphabetic writing system, which was a big deal. Before them, writing was like trying to read a doctor's prescription. Good luck deciphering that. The Phoenician alphabet was a game changer, simplifying communication and laying the groundwork for future alphabets, including the one you're reading right now. So, next time you write a grocery list, give a nod to the Phoenicians. In the end, the rise of the Phoenician civilization wasn't just about pretty sails and fancy dyes. It was about adapting to circumstances, playing to their strengths, and seizing every opportunity the sea threw their way. They turned geographical limitations into a launchpad for empire building and became legends in their own right. So, here's to the Phoenicians. masters of the maritime hustle, proving once, and for all that sometimes, the best way to deal with a rocky start is to set sail for the horizon. Now that we've given a nod to the Phoenicians' knack for maritime escapades, let's take a closer look at their trade networks. Picture these ancient seafarers as the original GPS devices, except their satellites were stars, and they didn't charge an annual subscription fee. The Phoenicians were the Mediterranean's FedEx, zipping from port to port with the efficiency of a caffeinated courier. But let's not get too carried away with romantic visions of swarthy sailors and exotic spices. Their trade empire was more like a corporate conglomerate with a serious case of wanderlust. The Phoenician trade routes were the envy of the ancient world, stretching from the eastern Mediterranean all the way to the Iberian Peninsula. That's right, these guys weren't content with just pottering around near home. They cast their nets wide, from Cyprus to Sardinia, and even as far as the British Isles, where they traded for tin. Yes, tin. It was the ancient equivalent of trading stocks, because bronze doesn't make itself, folks. Their routes were like the world's first Silk Road, only wetter and with more sea monsters. Speaking of sea monsters, let's tackle the myth of the mysterious mariners. Sure, it's tempting to imagine the Phoenicians as enigmatic adventurers, sailing into the sunset on quests of discovery. But the reality is, they were more like shrewd business moguls who knew a good deal when they saw one. Their voyages were meticulously planned, their ships laden with goods that would make any merchant salivate. We're talking lumber, glass, textiles, and yes, that infamous Tyrian purple dye. They were the ancient version of a diversified portfolio, ensuring they had a finger in every pie, or amphora, as it were. Now, let's talk colonies. Carthage is the crown jewel in the Phoenician colonial diadem. Founded around 814 BCE, according to legend, by Queen Dido, though we should take ancient founding myths with a grain of archaeological salt. Carthage was the New York City of the ancient world, a bustling metropolis that became a powerhouse in its own right. Its strategic location on the North African coast made it a linchpin in the Phoenician trade network. Carthage quickly grew to overshadow its mother city, Tyre, establishing a trade empire that even Rome found troublesome, to put it mildly. The economic impact of this trading juggernaut was staggering. The Phoenicians dealt in a dizzying array of goods, from everyday essentials like salted fish and olive oil to luxury items like precious metals and intricately crafted jewelry. Their trade networks brought them unimaginable wealth, the kind that would make Scrooge McDuck consider a career change. It's estimated that at the height of their power, the Phoenicians controlled trade routes that spanned over 3,000 miles. That's some serious mileage, folks, but let's not gloss over the less glamorous side of their trade empire. The Phoenicians were as much about strategy as they were about sweet-talking local rulers into signing favorable trade agreements. Their business acumen wasn't just about what they sold, but how they sold it. They knew the value of a good story, spinning tales of exotic lands and rare goods to inflate prices and demand. It was marketing genius, pure and simple. And speaking of marketing, let's not forget their ultimate PR move, the alphabet. The Phoenicians weren't just hawking goods, they were selling ideas. Their alphabetic writing system wasn't just a way to keep track of invoices. It was a tool that facilitated communication across vast distances, ensuring that their commercial interests were always in good hands, literally. In a way, they were the original influencers, shaping culture and commerce with the flick of a pen, or stylus, as it were. The Phoenicians also understood the power of alliances. They weren't just building ships, they were building networks, both political and commercial. Their trade agreements often involved complex negotiations, balancing the demands of local rulers against their own interests. It was a delicate dance, and one that required a level of diplomacy that would make even today's politicians break into a sweat. And let's not forget the economic realities of their time. Trading wasn't just about profits, it was about survival. The Mediterranean wasn't a peaceful blue expanse, but a battleground of competing interests. Pirates, storms, and hostile empires were just a few of the challenges they faced. Yet, despite these hurdles, the Phoenicians thrived, turning adversity into opportunity with the kind of resilience that would make any modern entrepreneur nod in admiration. In the end, the Phoenician trade networks were a testament to what humans can achieve with a bit of ingenuity and a lot of determination. They were the original globalists, proving that even in ancient times, the world was connected in ways we often overlook. So next time you're sipping your morning coffee, spare a thought for the Phoenicians, those mysterious mariners who weren't so mysterious after all, but rather the ultimate masters of the maritime hustle. And remember, the real mystery isn't how they sailed the seas, but how they navigated the complex waters of ancient commerce with such aplomb. Now, let's set our sails toward the Phoenicians' piece de resistance, the alphabet. And before you roll your eyes thinking, oh great, a lecture on ancient letters, let me assure you, this isn't your typical history class. We're talking about a cultural contribution that's more groundbreaking than sliced bread. If bread had letters, that is. The Phoenicians, with their knack for practicality, devised a system that took the complex mess of cuneiform and hieroglyphics and turned it into something even a toddler could grasp. Let's just say, if the ancients had social media, the Phoenicians would have gone viral. We often hear the Phoenicians described as cultural ambassadors, spreading literacy and knowledge wherever they went, like some ancient TED talk speakers. But hold your horses, or should I say galleys, because the reality is far more utilitarian. Their alphabet wasn't some noble effort to enlighten the masses. No, it was more like the ancient version of a business app, designed to keep track of trade deals, inventory lists, and IOUs. Forget romantic notions of scholarly pursuits. This was about ensuring the bottom line stayed as black as their ink. The Phoenician alphabet consisted of a lean and mean 22 characters, each representing a consonant. Vowels. Who needs them? Those would come later, courtesy of the Greeks, who decided their words needed a bit more flair. But back to the Phoenicians, they were all about that efficiency life. Their alphabet was a tool, a way to streamline communication in a world where time was money, and both were in short supply. It was like swapping out a cumbersome typewriter for a sleek laptop, except instead of processing words, you were processing grain shipments and timber orders. Now, let's address the myth of the Phoenicians as linguistic pioneers spreading culture like a warm blanket over the cold world. Sure, their alphabet traveled far and wide, influencing the Greek, and later, the Roman alphabets, and eventually giving birth to the Latin script that you and I are using to chat right now. But let's not kid ourselves into thinking this was some altruistic mission. The spread of the Phoenician script was more about necessity than nobility. When you're running a trade network that spans thousands of miles, clear communication isn't just helpful, it's essential. In fact, the real story here is how the Phoenicians used this alphabet to grease the wheels of commerce. Imagine trying to negotiate a trade agreement with a script as cumbersome as Egyptian hieroglyphs. You'd be there all day chiseling out little pictures of ducks and snakes. The Phoenician alphabet, on the other hand, was like the shorthand of the ancient world. It allowed merchants to jot down contracts and agreements quickly, keeping their voyages profitable and efficient. And in a world where pirates, storms, and rival traders were constant threats, every second counted. So, while the Phoenicians may not have been cultural evangelists, they were undeniably savvy. They understood that a streamlined script could facilitate trade in ways that cumbersome pictograms couldn't. This practical genius ensured that their alphabet would outlive them, spreading across the Mediterranean like wildfire and leaving an indelible mark on Western civilization. The next time you scribble a grocery list or text a friend, you're paying homage to those ancient mariners who turned necessity into invention. But let's not get too misty-eyed about their legacy just yet. The Phoenicians were as pragmatic as they were innovative. They didn't invent the alphabet for the love of language or the beauty of literature. It was a business decision, plain and simple. They needed a way to efficiently manage their sprawling trade networks, and the alphabet was the perfect tool for the job. It was the ancient equivalent of moving from paper ledgers to digital spreadsheets, an innovation driven by the need for speed and accuracy. And let's not forget the economic context that shaped this innovation. The Phoenicians were operating in a cutthroat world where every advantage mattered. Their alphabet was a competitive edge, a way to stay one step ahead of rivals and ensure that their trade empire continued to thrive. It was about survival as much as success, a testament to the Phoenicians' ability to adapt and innovate in the face of constant challenges. The impact of this pragmatic invention cannot be overstated. The Phoenician alphabet laid the foundation for the Greek and Roman scripts, which in turn influenced countless other languages. It was a linguistic legacy that outlasted the Phoenicians themselves, echoing through history in ways they could never have imagined. And while they may not have set out to change the world, their alphabet undeniably did. So, as we sail away from the Phoenicians' alphabetic achievements, let's leave behind the romanticized notion of cultural ambassadors and embrace the gritty reality of pragmatic innovators. The Phoenicians were masters of turning challenges into opportunities, and their alphabet was a shining example of their ingenuity. They may have been driven by commerce, but their legacy was nothing short of revolutionary. And with that, we'll anchor here and save the next leg of our journey for another time. More stories of these maritime marvels await, so keep your sea legs steady and your curiosity sharp. There's a whole world of Phoenician history yet to explore. As we sail away from the Phoenicians' alphabetic accomplishments, let's drop anchor in the choppy seas of their political dynamics. If you thought ancient politics was all about grand empires and iron-fisted rulers, think again. The Phoenician city-states were more like a band of fiercely independent siblings who couldn't agree on a family vacation, let alone form a unified government. Picture a Mediterranean version of a neighborhood association where every house has its own agenda, and you've got a sense of the chaos. First off, let's debunk the myth of a unified Phoenician state. Spoiler alert, it never existed. These city-states were as cohesive as a bag of cats, each guarding its independence like a dragon hoarding gold. Tyre, Sidon, Byblos, Arwad, they were more like rival tech startups than a single, harmonious entity. Each city had its own king, its own policies, and a distinct knack for giving the cold shoulder to any notion of unity. So, why were they so fiercely independent? Geography, dear Watson, geography. Sandwiched between rugged mountains and the beckoning sea, each city-state was geographically isolated enough to develop its own identity. With limited land routes and a penchant for maritime escapades, these cities had more in common with Venice than with, say, ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia. And when your next-door neighbor is a formidable empire, maintaining autonomy isn't just a preference, it's survival 101. Enter the political dance with neighboring giants like Egypt and Assyria. The Phoenicians were masters of what we might call diplomacy by necessity. They had to be, given their prime real estate smack dab in the crosshairs of regional superpowers. Imagine being the little guy on a playground surrounded by bullies, except these bullies have armies. The Phoenicians didn't have the manpower to match Egypt's chariots or Assyria's ironclad foot soldiers, so they resorted to the next best thing, strategic alliances. The Assyrians, for instance, were the ancient equivalent of a steamroller, unstoppable and relentless. The Phoenicians, ever the pragmatists, figured it was best to pay tribute rather than face destruction. This tribute system was basically ancient insurance. Pay up and hope the Assyrians don't come knocking. And it wasn't just about gold and silver. Sometimes it was about providing ships or sailors, which the Phoenicians had in spades. On the flip side, their relationship with Egypt was more like an on-again, off-again romance. At times, they were valuable trading partners, with Egyptian papyrus and Phoenician timber swapping hands like collectible cards. Other times, the Phoenicians were left dealing with Egyptian demands that made modern bureaucracy look like a cakewalk. Yet, through it all, they maintained a delicate balancing act, ensuring that neither side got too cozy or too hostile. The cost of this autonomy was steep. Tribute payments drained resources, while building and maintaining a fleet to deter potential invaders wasn't exactly cheap. But the Phoenicians were nothing if not resourceful. They leveraged their maritime prowess to sustain their economy, transforming the Mediterranean into a bustling marketplace. Every ship that left a Phoenician harbor was a floating lifeline, carrying goods that paid the bills and filled the coffers. And here's the kicker. While they navigated these turbulent political waters, they never lost sight of their main goal, self-preservation. They were the ultimate political chameleons, adapting to the whims of power-hungry empires while keeping their cities intact. It was a tightrope walk of epic proportions, with the ever-present threat of invasion looming like a storm on the horizon. But let's not paint them as mere victims of circumstance. The Phoenicians were shrewd operators, using their trade networks as leverage in political negotiations. Need a favor from the king of Tyre? Better make sure your trade policies are favorable. Want a shipment of that luxurious purple dye? Perhaps a reduction in tribute is in order. This was politics as commerce, with the Phoenicians playing the long game like seasoned chess masters. Their political strategies were as diverse as their trade routes. Some cities, like Tyre, relied on their formidable defenses to deter aggression, while others, like Sidon, played the diplomatic card, cozying up to whichever power was in vogue. The Phoenicians were like the Switzerland of the ancient world, not neutral per se, but certainly adept at staying out of the fray. It's tempting to romanticize these city-states as isolated bastions of freedom, but the reality was far more nuanced. They were constantly juggling the demands of survival with the desire for prosperity, navigating a geopolitical landscape that was as volatile as it was lucrative. And yet, they thrived, turning adversity into opportunity with a resilience that would make even the most seasoned diplomat envious. In the end, the Phoenician city-states were a testament to the power of autonomy. They proved that you didn't need a centralized empire to wield influence, just a network of ships and a knack for diplomacy. Their legacy is one of adaptability and innovation, a reminder that sometimes the best way to navigate a turbulent world is to set your own course. And while their political landscape was as fragmented as a jigsaw puzzle, the picture they left behind is one of enduring resilience. Now, as we prepare to explore the next chapter of Phoenician history, let's leave this political tapestry unraveled, ready to uncover more stories of these maritime maestros. With alliances as complex as their trade routes and a determination as deep as the Mediterranean, there's plenty more to discover. So keep your compass steady and your curiosity piqued. The best is yet to come. As we sail away from the Phoenicians' political dance, let's prepare to meet the formidable forces that would eventually eclipse these maritime maestros. Picture the scene. Phoenician city-states, once bustling hubs of trade and innovation, now cast in the long shadow of emerging empires like Rome. It's a classic tale of David versus Goliath, only this time David forgot his slingshot, and Goliath brought an army. By the time the Phoenicians found themselves eye to eye with Rome, they were already feeling the squeeze from other regional power players. The Assyrians and Babylonians had taken their toll, like demanding landlords who never miss a rent payment. But it was the rise of Rome that would deliver the knockout punch. Rome wasn't just any empire. It was the ancient world's equivalent of a corporate takeover, complete with hostile bids and aggressive expansion tactics. Let's talk numbers for a moment. By the 3rd century BCE, Rome was building an empire that stretched over 700 miles, from Spain in the west to Anatolia in the east. The Phoenicians, with their scattered city-states and decentralized governance, were like boutique shops trying to compete with a megastore. And we all know how that story goes. Carthage, that glittering jewel of the Phoenician diaspora, became the focal point of this epic confrontation. The rivalry between Rome and Carthage was so intense that it sparked not one, not two, but 3 Punic Wars. These conflicts were less about minor land disputes and more about who got to be the Mediterranean's top dog. Spoiler alert, Rome won, but not before Carthage gave them a run for their money. Enter Hannibal, the Carthaginian general whose name still sends shivers down Roman spines. He's the guy who famously crossed the Alps with elephants in tow, proving that Carthage wasn't going down without a fight. Hannibal's audacious campaigns are the stuff of legend, but here's the reality check. Audacity only gets you so far when you're up against Rome's relentless legions. By 146 BCE, after a bitter and brutal siege, Carthage fell, and with it, the last vestiges of Phoenician autonomy were snuffed out. Yet, even as Rome absorbed the Phoenician territories, the allure of the Phoenician legacy endured. We love a good underdog story, and the Phoenicians fit the bill perfectly. They were the scrappy seafarers, the cunning traders who danced circles around empires, at least until they couldn't. The romantic image of the Phoenicians as maritime mavericks persists, overshadowing the harsh reality of their eventual demise. So, what gives the Phoenicians staying power in our collective imagination? For one, they were the original connectors, weaving a web of commerce and culture that linked distant shores. They were like the ancient internet, facilitating the exchange of goods, ideas, and yes, even gossip. And let's not forget the power of their alphabet, a tool so revolutionary it outlived its creators and became the foundation of Western written communication. The Phoenicians were the Steve Jobs of their day, innovating not for the sake of art, but but for the sake of efficiency. Their influence extends beyond commerce and communication. The Phoenicians were cultural chameleons, blending their own traditions with those of the regions they touched. They were less about cultural imperialism and more about cultural exchange, proving that sometimes the best way to leave a mark is to leave a little bit of yourself everywhere you go. It's a legacy of adaptability and resilience, qualities that resonate even today. But let's not kid ourselves about the realities of their decline. As Rome tightened its grip, the Phoenician city-states became footnotes in the Imperial chronicles. Their vibrant ports and thriving markets fell silent, absorbed into the Roman juggernaut. The Phoenicians became victims of their own success, their innovations co-opted by the very powers they once outmaneuvered. It's a sobering reminder that in the relentless march of history, even the brightest stars can be eclipsed. In reflecting on their long-term impact, it's clear why the Phoenician story still resonates. They were the ultimate hustlers, turning geographic limitations into opportunities, crafting a legacy that defies the passage of time. Their story is one of ingenuity and enterprise, a testament to the power of adaptability in a world that seldom stands still. So, as we close the chapter on the Phoenicians, let's raise a metaphorical glass to these ancient artisans of the high seas. They may have been absorbed into the empires they once rivaled, but their influence is woven into the very fabric of history. From the alphabet we use to the trade networks that still crisscross our planet, the Phoenicians left an indelible mark. Their story is a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the spirit of innovation can light the way. So, here's to the Phoenicians, those maritime maestros who dared to dream big and sail far, leaving a legacy that still ripples across the centuries. As we drift toward the horizon of history, remember that the echoes of their voyage continue to resonate, a testament to the enduring power of human ingenuity. You open your eyes to the soft rustling of the breeze slipping through the open windows of your Roman domus in Pompeii. Not exactly your typical morning alarm, but it beats the screech of a rooster any day. The sunlight is already spilling in, painting the walls with a warm glow. This is your cue to rise and shine, or more accurately, to rise and get moving, because in Pompeii, the early bird doesn't just catch the worm, it catches the best spot at the public baths. First things first, you step into the atrium, the beating heart of your home. It's a grand space, designed to impress, with an open roof and a shallow pool in the center called the impluvium. This isn't just a fancy water feature. It's an ingenious bit of Roman engineering that collects rainwater. Whoever said ancient folks didn't have an eye for practicality clearly never visited a Roman household. The atrium isn't just pretty, it's functional, serving as the main light source and air conditioner all rolled into one. As you splash some of that collected rainwater on your face, let's talk bathrooms, or the lack thereof. See, Romans had this quirk. They didn't do private baths. You're not just going to hop into a shower in your own pad. Instead, cleanliness is a public affair. You'll soon head to one of the many baths scattered across Pompeii. But before you rush off, breakfast awaits. Spoiler, it's not going to be a full English or a stack of pancakes. The typical Roman breakfast, or intaculum, is light. Maybe some bread with cheese or fruit, washed down with a gulp of watered-down wine. It's not a feast, but it's enough to fuel you for the morning's activities. Before you leave, take a moment to admire your surroundings. Your home, like most in Pompeii, is a testament to the town's urban planning genius. Homes here are tightly packed like sardines, yet each one feels like a private oasis. The typical domus is a one-story affair, but let's not kid ourselves. It's all about the status. The wealthier you are, the more elaborate your home. Some of your neighbors even have frescoes on the walls and mosaics on the floor, the ancient equivalent of showing off a flashy car. Now, about those myths. You've probably heard that Romans lounged around in togas all day. Well, that's more Hollywood than history. Togas are for formal occasions. On a regular day, you're more likely to throw on a tunic. Consider it the ancient precursor to the modern-day t-shirt. Stepping outside, the streets of Pompeii are bustling. There's a method to the madness here, with roads designed to accommodate both pedestrians and the occasional cart. The streets are narrow, but not haphazard. Roman urban planners were on point, creating a grid-like pattern that makes navigating the city a breeze. You might even spot the raised stepping stones at intersections, a clever design so you can cross without getting your sandals soaked. Trust me, you'll appreciate those when it rains. As you make your way to the baths, think about this. Pompeii is a city on the rise, quite literally. It's got a population of around 11,000 people, yet it feels much grander. This isn't just a backwater town. It's a buzzing hub of commerce and culture. But let's not get too carried away. It's still a bit of a wild west, with taverns and brothels aplenty. But hey, all work and no play, right? So here you are, starting your day just like any ancient Pompeian would. It's a life of simplicity punctuated by moments of grandeur, full of clever design and thoughtful planning. And that's just the morning, my friend. Stick around, because the day is only just beginning, and there's so much more to explore in this fascinating ancient world. So, as you step into the lively streets of Pompeii, you're immediately greeted by a cacophony of sounds. Vendors hawking their goods, the clip-clop of horses, and the chatter of townsfolk. Welcome to the daily symphony of ancient city life. If you're imagining a quaint little hamlet, think again. Pompeii's streets are alive with business and banter, a testament to its role as a bustling commercial hub. Your first stop is the Forum, the beating heart of civic life. Picture a massive open space, a bit like the Roman Empire's version of a modern-day mall, but with a lot more toga action and considerably fewer food courts. Here, politics, commerce, and religion all intertwine in a daily dance. It's where magistrates strut their stuff, merchants strike deals, and temples cast long shadows over the everyday hustle and bustle. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a Facebook feed. Scroll through, and you'll get a taste of everything happening in town. Now, let's dive into some economic realities. The Forum isn't just for show. It's the throbbing vein of Pompeii's economy. Merchants from across the empire come here to trade everything from olive oil to garum, the infamous fish sauce that Romans drizzled over everything like it was liquid gold. It's the ketchup of ancient Rome, minus the tomatoes and with a hefty dose of pungency. The prices? Well, they could be steep. A small amphora of the finest garum could set you back a denarius or two, about a day's wages for a laborer. Talk about a pricey condiment. But it's not just about food. Pompeii was a microcosm of Roman trade, with goods flowing in and out like a well-oiled machine. You've got textiles from Egypt, pottery from Gaul, and exotic spices from the east. This place was less a sleepy town, and more a node in a sprawling network that stretched across the known world. It's globalization, Roman style, with all the complexity and conflict that entails. As you wander through the Forum, you might notice the temples dedicated to Jupiter, Apollo, and Venus. Don't be fooled into thinking these are purely spiritual spaces. Religion and politics are two sides of the same coin here. Holding a priesthood isn't just about pious devotion. It's a savvy career move, a stepping stone to political power. It's like getting an MBA, but with more incense and fewer spreadsheets. And speaking of politics, let's talk about the local bigwigs. Pompeii wasn't some democratic utopia. The town was run by a handful of elite families who played the political game with all the finesse of a seasoned chess master. Elections in Pompeii were as much about spectacle as they were about policy. Candidates plastered the city walls with campaign slogans, promising everything from grand games to more generous grain distributions. It's like ancient advertising, minus the glossy magazine spreads and TV spots. But don't let the grandeur fool you. Beneath the marble and mosaics, Pompeii was a town with its share of problems. Like any city, it had crime, poverty, and the occasional scandal. You might bump into a slave running errands for their master or catch sight of a debtor trying to dodge a creditor. Pompeii's streets were as much a stage for human drama as they were a marketplace for goods. While you're here, let's debunk a myth or two. You've probably heard that Romans were all about opulence and indulgence. Sure, the elite threw lavish banquets that would make today's gourmands blush, but for most folks, life was a little more Spartan. Bread, olives, and the occasional bit of meat formed the staple diet. And wine, it was more of a necessity than a luxury, diluted with water and consumed by everyone, even kids. It was safer than the water, after all. As you wander past the basilica, the law court of the day, imagine the deals and disputes that played out here. From property rights to business contracts, this was where Pompeians sought justice. It's a far cry from today's legal dramas, but the stakes were just as high. Justice in the Roman world was swift and often brutal, and the basilica was the stage for many a heated exchange. And let's not forget the graffiti. Pompeii's walls are an ancient Twitter feed, with everything from political endorsements to cheeky love notes. Forget the idea that graffiti is a modern curse on cityscapes. In Pompeii, it was an art form and a means of expression. It's raw, it's real, and it's as close as you'll get to hearing the voices of ancient Pompeians. So, as you stand in the forum, soak it all in. This is Pompeii at its peak, a vibrant, chaotic, and utterly fascinating slice of Roman life. It's a place where the grand and the gritty exist side by side, where history isn't just a series of dates and events, but a living, breathing tapestry of human experience. And as you prepare to explore further, keep in mind that this is just a snapshot of a day in the life of Pompeii. There's more to come, more to see, and more to discover. Stay curious, because the story of Pompeii is far from over. As you stand there, soaking in the hubbub of Pompeii's forum, your stomach starts to grumble, a not-so-gentle reminder that the morning's modest entaculum has long since worn off. Time to indulge in the ancient world's answer to fast food, the thermopolium. Imagine a Roman version of a food truck, minus the wheels, and with a lot more marble. Now, let's be clear. A thermopolium isn't serving up gourmet meals. It's more like grabbing a quick bite between errands. These street-side establishments were the lifeblood of Pompeii's daily culinary life, particularly for those who didn't have a kitchen at home or preferred to keep their kitchens as pristine as a senator's toga. As you step into one of these bustling joints, you're greeted by a long counter embedded with large dolia, massive clay jars sunk into the stone, filled with hot, ready-to-eat food. Picture a buffet, but Roman style. The aroma of spices and cooked meats wafts through the air, a heady concoction that makes your mouth water despite the questionable hygiene standards. On the menu today, a hearty stew, perhaps, or some lentils spiced with coriander and cumin. If you're feeling fancy, maybe a slice of bread with some garum splashed on top for that extra umami kick. And for dessert, how about some dried figs or a honey cake? Don't expect to find any tomatoes or pasta, though those culinary staples are centuries away from making their debut in Italy. Pompeian dining habits were as layered as a good lasagna, with stark differences between the classes. The wealthy elite feasted in opulent tricliniums, their lavish dining rooms adorned with frescoes depicting mythological banquets. They dined on peacock, dormice stuffed with minced pork, and oysters imported from as far away as Britain. Yes, you heard that right. Romans were importing shellfish from a land better known for its bleak weather than its culinary delights. Talk about global cuisine. For the average Pompeian, however, the diet was simpler. Bread, olives, and cheese were staples, along with the ever-present garum. Meat was a rare treat, reserved for special occasions or when one could afford it. For most folks, fish and legumes were the proteins of choice. It's a far cry from the decadent feasts you might see in Hollywood epics, but it was nutritious and, more importantly, affordable. Let's debunk a culinary myth while we're here. You've probably seen depictions of Romans reclining on couches, grapes dangling from their mouths, attending endless orgies of food and wine. The truth, most meals were eaten sitting up, and while banquets could be elaborate, they weren't a daily occurrence. The average Roman meal was functional, designed to fill the belly without breaking the bank. Imported goods played a significant role in shaping local cuisine. The Romans were master traders, bringing in goods from across the empire. Spices from India, dates from North Africa, and even wine from Gaul enriched the Pompeian palate. This wasn't just about taste, it was a status symbol. The more exotic your pantry, the higher your social standing. It's like having a fridge full of artisanal cheeses today, proof that you've made it. But what about the cost of these culinary delights? A loaf of bread might set you back 1 or 2 quadrantes, the smallest Roman coin. A visit to a thermopolium could cost a few more, depending on the dish. And while prices fluctuated with supply and demand, food was generally affordable for most, thanks in part to the grain dole, a government program that provided subsidized grain to the poorer citizens. Think of it as ancient social security, but with more carbs and less paperwork. As you finish your meal and step back onto the street, consider this. While the elite indulged in extravagant banquets, the average Pompeian's diet was a testament to simplicity and resourcefulness. It's a stark reminder that beneath the glamour of Roman civilization lay a society that was complex, diverse, and profoundly human. So, with your hunger sated, the rest of the day in Pompeii awaits. There's more to explore, more stories to uncover, and more myths to bust. The The tale of Pompeii isn't just about grand ruins and volcanic doom. It's a living, breathing narrative of everyday life, full of surprises and insights. Stick around, because there's much more to come in this ancient city's story. And with your appetite satisfied, it's time to head to the amphitheater for an afternoon of adrenaline-pumping entertainment. Welcome to the ancient world's version of a blockbuster movie, complete with all the drama, violence, and spectacle you could want. Forget Netflix. In Pompeii, the gladiator games are where the action is. Now, let's set the scene. You're making your way to the amphitheater, crown jewel of Pompeii's entertainment district. This isn't just any old venue. It's the oldest surviving Roman amphitheater, dating back to 70 BCE. Imagine an arena capable of seating up to 20,000 spectators, nearly double the town's population. Talk about drawing a crowd. It's a testament to the game's popularity, pulling in folks from neighboring towns like bees to honey. As you step inside, the noise hits you like a wave. The roar of the crowd, the clatter of armor, and the distant roar of lions create an intoxicating symphony that gets your heart racing. Here, the societal obsession with these brutal spectacles is palpable. It's not just about the blood and guts. It's about the drama, the stories of glory and defeat, and the chance to see heroes, or villains, rise and fall before your eyes. But let's talk Turkey, or rather denarii, because these spectacles didn't come cheap. Organizing games was a costly affair, often bankrolled by wealthy sponsors looking to boost their political cachet. Think of it as ancient political advertising, but with more swords and fewer slogans. A single day's event could run into thousands of denarii, equivalent to a small fortune, and that's not counting the price of exotic animals imported from far-flung corners of the empire. Elephants from Africa or tigers from Asia weren't just crowd pleasers. They were status symbols, showcasing the sponsor's wealth and connections. And what about the gladiators themselves? These weren't all burly brutes born to fight. Many were slaves or prisoners of war, forced into the arena with the promise of freedom, or at least survival, dangling like a carrot on a stick. But some were volunteers, free men drawn by the allure of fame and fortune. Yes, gladiators could earn quite a bit. Successful fighters might pocket up to 12,000 sesterces for a single victory. That's enough to buy a modest house in Pompeii, mind you. Now, time to puncture a few myths. Forget the Hollywood image of gladiators as rugged rebels with hearts of gold. The truth is, they were more like highly trained athletes, living in special schools called ludi, where they honed their skills under strict conditions. Their diets were designed to bulk them up, earning them the nickname barley men due to their grain-heavy meals. Sound glamorous? Hardly. But these men were the rock stars of their day, with fan followings and sponsorship deals that rival modern sports heroes. And here's where the story gets political. The games weren't just about entertainment. They were a tool for social control. By providing free games, politicians kept the masses entertained and distracted, all while reinforcing Roman values of courage, discipline, and martial prowess. Bread and circuses, as they say, the perfect recipe for maintaining public order and quelling dissent. It's a bit like using reality TV to keep the populace placated, only with a lot more blood and fewer commercials. Watch the gladiators in action, and you'll see that every fight is a carefully choreographed dance. It's not just brute force, it's strategy, skill, and a good dose of showmanship. The weapons vary, swords, tridents, nets, and so do the fighters' styles. Some are heavily armored, like the Murmillo, while others, like the Retiarius, rely on speed and agility. Each bout is a story in itself, a physical narrative of struggle and survival. The crowd plays its part too, with thumbs up or down determining a fighter's fate. Contrary to some cinematic portrayals, a thumbs down didn't always mean death. The decision lay with the editor, often influenced by the crowd's mood and the sponsor's wishes. Gladiators were valuable investments, after all, and a good fighter was worth keeping around for future games. As you watch the spectacle unfold, consider the societal implications. These games reflect the harsh realities of Roman society, a world where life could be brutal and short, yet where the promise of glory and redemption shone bright. They were a microcosm of the Roman Empire itself, with its blend of sophistication and savagery, power and vulnerability. So, as the sun dips lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the arena, you're left with a heady mix of exhilaration and reflection. The games are over for today, but the echoes of combat linger in the air, a reminder of the complex, often contradictory nature of Roman life. It's It's a world of contrasts, where beauty and brutality, freedom and oppression coexist in a delicate balance. With the amphitheater behind you, there's still more of Pompeii to explore. The city's story isn't finished yet. There's more to discover, more myths to unravel, and more history to bring to life. As you make your way back through the streets, vibrant with the energy of the day's events, keep your eyes open and your curiosity piqued. Tomorrow holds new stories, and Pompeii's saga is far from over. As the thrill of the amphitheater fades into the evening air, it's time to trade the roar of the crowd for the soothing murmur of water. You're heading to the baths, Pompeii's social epicenter, where relaxation and networking go hand in hand. This isn't just about getting clean. It's an intricate dance of engineering, culture, and community wrapped up in a steamy package. The Romans, ever the masters of architecture and innovation, turned bathhouses into veritable palaces of leisure. Picture this, a sprawling complex of rooms, each with a specific purpose and temperature, seamlessly connected by a series of corridors. These aren't just public bathrooms, they're feats of engineering genius. The caldarium, tepidarium, and frigidarium, hot, warm, and cold rooms, respectively, are designed to take you on a journey of thermal delight. It's like a sauna, spa, and water park rolled into one, minus the chlorine and screaming kids. But let's get into the nitty-gritty. The hypocaust system, an ancient Roman version of underfloor heating. Imagine a series of pillars lifting the floor slightly above the ground, allowing hot air to circulate beneath, warming the room from below. It's a marvel of ingenuity, keeping the caldarium toasty even on the chilliest of days. The Romans didn't just stop at floors, though. They heated walls too, using cleverly designed flues to distribute warmth evenly. It's like central heating, but with a whole lot more brick and mortar. As you strip down and slip into the warm waters, you're not just washing away the grime of the day. You're immersing yourself in a cultural phenomenon. The baths are where business deals are brokered, gossip is exchanged, and political alliances are forged. It's LinkedIn, Facebook, and Reddit combined, with a side of steam and soap. And while you're soaking, keep an eye out for the strigils, curved metal tools used to scrape off dirt and sweat. Sure, it sounds a bit like exfoliation by medieval torture, but trust me, you'll feel like a new person afterward. Now, let's debunk a myth. You might think Roman baths were all about luxury and indulgence, a hedonistic escape for the elite. But here's the twist. They were remarkably democratic. With entry fees as low as a quadrans, the smallest Roman coin, bathing was accessible to most citizens. Sure, the wealthy had their private suites and exclusive hours, but for the average Pompeian, the baths were a daily ritual, a place to unwind and connect. It's social leveling at its finest, with senators and slaves alike sharing the same waters. Speaking of water, let's address the Herculean task of supplying it to an entire city. Pompeii was fed by aqueducts, those majestic channels that brought fresh water from springs miles away. The main aqueduct, Aqua Augusta, served not just Pompeii but several other towns, a lifeline stretching over 100 kilometers. It delivered water to public fountains, private homes, and of course, the baths. This wasn't just about convenience. It was a statement of power and prosperity. In a world where access to water could mean the difference between life and death, the aqueduct was a symbol of Roman might and technological prowess. As you drift from room to room, from the steaming caldarium to the bracing frigidarium, consider the baths' political significance. They were more than just places to relax. They were tools of Romanization, spreading the empire's culture and values across conquered lands. By introducing the baths, Rome wasn't just providing public amenities. It was exporting a way of life, embedding itself in the very fabric of the cities it absorbed. It's imperialism with a splash, if you will. But let's not romanticize too much. Beneath the polished marble and bubbling waters, the baths were also vectors of disease. With hygiene standards that would make a modern health inspector faint, they were breeding grounds for all sorts of ailments. It's the ancient world's version of a petri dish, yet somehow, the allure of the baths kept Romans coming back day after day. It's a testament to their social pull, the promise of connection outweighing the risk of contagion. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the city, you step out of the baths feeling refreshed and rejuvenated. The day is drawing to a close, but there's one last thing to ponder, the fate of this vibrant city. Pompeii, with its bustling streets, grand villas, and innovative infrastructure, is a snapshot of Roman life at its zenith. Yet, as we know all too well, this snapshot is about to be violently interrupted. Mount Vesuvius looms ominously over the city, a constant reminder of nature's unpredictable fury. In just a few short years, it will erupt with devastating force, burying Pompeii under a thick blanket of ash and pumice. It's a cataclysm that will freeze this moment in time, preserving the city in a state of eerie stasis. But for now, life goes on, blissfully unaware of the impending disaster. Pompeii's legacy is a paradox, remembered as much for its destruction as for its life. The city's tragic end has immortalized it, turning a thriving community into an archaeological treasure trove. It's a poignant reminder of the fragility of existence, the thin line between prosperity and ruin. As you walk the streets, filled with the echoes of history, consider this. Pompeii's greatest gift to us isn't just its artifacts or architecture, but its humanity. Through its ruins, we glimpse the lives of people not so different from ourselves, navigating the complexities of their world with the same blend of hope, ambition, and vulnerability. So, as you bid farewell to this ancient city, take with you the stories it has shared. Pompeii is more than a cautionary tale of nature's wrath. It's a testament to human resilience and ingenuity. It's a city that, in its death, has given life to our understanding of the past. And as you step back into the present, remember that history isn't just about what was, but about what it teaches us today. Pompeii's story may have ended abruptly, but its lessons endure, a timeless narrative etched in stone and ash. In the roaring cacophony of American politics, John F. Kennedy's rise to the presidency offers a tale as glossy as a freshly minted dime. Born on May 29, 1917, into a family where ambition was practically a genetic trait, JFK was cradled in luxury during a time when the rest of the country was tightening its belt. The Great Depression. The Kennedys were the kind of family where dinner-table conversations likely involved strategic plans that would make a game of Risk look like child's play. Joe Kennedy, the patriarch, was a man with a mission: to embed his family name into the annals of American power. Now, if you think old Joe was just another wealthy dad with dreams for his kids, think again. This guy was playing 4D chess while everyone else was trying to figure out checkers. He amassed his fortune through shrewd, some might say shady business moves, becoming the first chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission in 1934. That's right, the same guy who once danced around the edges of insider trading was now leading the charge to clean it up. Talk about the Farks guarding the henhouse. But enough about Joe. Let's skip to the star of our show. JFK wasn't exactly your average Joe, pun intended. He had charm oozing out of his pores and a Harvard education to boot. But life wasn't all cocktails and Ivy League prestige. Kennedy faced serious health issues, including a chronic back problem and Addison's disease, a fact that was as well guarded as the recipe for Coca-Cola. Yet, these obstacles didn't stop him from becoming a war hero. In 1943, Lieutenant Kennedy took command of the PT-109, a torpedo boat patrolling the Solomon Islands. When a Japanese destroyer sliced his vessel in two, Kennedy didn't just go down with his ship. Instead, he swam miles to safety, towing an injured crewmate with a life jacket strap clenched between his teeth. He was like Aquaman, but with a military uniform and a Boston accent. This feat of heroism earned him the Navy and Marine Corps Medal, and more importantly, it gave him a narrative of bravery that would later help propel his political career. By 1946, JFK was ready to hang up his sailor's cap and dive into the tempestuous waters of politics. He ran for Congress in Massachusetts' 11th District, a campaign famously bolstered by his father's financial support and his own relentless energy. Kennedy's charm and good looks didn't hurt either. He was the kind of guy who could make a stump speech feel like a fireside chat. His win was decisive, and at just 29, he was on his way to becoming a darling of the Democratic Party. Now, let's talk about the Kennedy allure. It wasn't just about the man himself, but the whole package. The wit, the style, the carefully crafted image. In the era of the Eisenhower sweater, Kennedy was more of a tailored suit kind of guy, sharp, sophisticated, and very aware of the burgeoning power of television. His 1953 marriage to Jacqueline Bouvier wasn't just a union of two people. It was a merging of two formidable brands. Jackie brought her own blend of elegance and sophistication to the mix, transforming them into America's very own royalty. But while the Camelot myth was being carefully constructed, reality was a tad less glamorous. Behind the scenes, JFK was a complex and often contradictory figure. He was a pragmatist who could charm the press with a quip while privately juggling a political balancing act that would make a Cirque du Soleil performer sweat. The myth of JFK is bulletproof, but the man himself was anything but. Even so, his youthful vigor and optimistic rhetoric captured the imagination of a nation teetering on the brink of modernity. The 1960 presidential election was his stage, and boy, did he perform. Against Richard Nixon, Kennedy was the epitome of cool, relaxed, charismatic, and ready to lead the free world. His narrow victory was a testament to the power of television and a well-timed tan. Yet, as we celebrate the legend, let's not forget the sheer audacity of his ascent. JFK's rise was as much about the American dream as it was about the nuances of privilege and power. In a world where smoke-filled rooms decided destinies, Kennedy showed that a bit of charm, a dash of heroism, and a whole lot of ambition could take you all the way to the Oval Office. And that, dear friends, is the not-so-humble beginning of John F. Kennedy's journey through the annals of history. And so, with a cocktail of charm, ambition, and a well-timed tan, John F. Kennedy sauntered his way into the Oval Office. But as anyone who's ever landed their dream job knows, the real work begins after everyone else has stopped clapping. For JFK, this meant transforming the myth of Camelot into a functioning reality, a task akin to turning a fairy tale into a biopic. Let's start with that inaugural address on January 20, 1961. Picture it, Washington, D.C., a crisp winter day, and Kennedy steps up to the podium with a presence that says, "I'm here to make history." And make history he did. "Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country," he proclaimed, a line so potent it could make even the most cynical voter consider taking up public service. JFK's speech was a masterclass in rhetoric, delivered with the kind of confidence that makes people believe in the impossible. It was the verbal equivalent of a shot of adrenaline, and it set the tone for a presidency that promised renewal and vigor. But here's where the Camelot myth starts to wobble. Being president isn't all soaring speeches and glamorous state dinners. It's more like running a circus where the lions are armed and the clowns have nuclear codes. Enter the Bay of Pigs, a less than stellar moment in early 1961 that could make even the most fervent Kennedy supporter wince. Now, the Bay of Pigs wasn't just a misstep. It was a full-on faceplant. Picture a CIA-backed invasion of Cuba, intended to overthrow Fidel Castro and spread democracy like peanut butter on toast. What actually happened was a botched landing on April 17, 1961, featuring 400 Cuban exiles facing off against Castro's well-prepared troops. Spoiler alert, it didn't go well. The invaders were outnumbered, outgunned, and out of luck, resulting in a swift and humiliating defeat. The price tag, around $13 million, plus a hefty interest payment on Kennedy's reputation. So, how did this fiasco unfold? Let's rewind. The plan was inherited from the Eisenhower administration, but JFK gave it the green light, trusting the CIA's assurances that success was all but guaranteed. Unfortunately, reality had other plans. The operation was a textbook case of overconfidence meeting underestimation. The CIA failed to account for everything from Castro's intelligence network to the sheer impossibility of maintaining secrecy in a world with nosy neighbors. Kennedy, for his part, owned up to the disaster. He famously quipped, "Victory has 100 fathers, but defeat is an orphan." It was a rare moment of humility in politics, a profession where admitting mistakes is as common as finding a unicorn in your backyard. The Bay of Pigs was a harsh lesson, a reminder that even a golden boy like JFK could stumble when the stakes were high. But let's not just stand around the wreckage. The debacle had far-reaching consequences, shaking Kennedy's confidence and altering his approach to foreign policy. It taught him the perils of relying solely on advisors, leading to a more cautious, skeptical outlook that would shape future decisions, including those during the Cuban Missile Crisis. In a way, the Bay of Pigs was the crucible that tempered Kennedy's leadership, transforming him from a starry-eyed idealist into a more seasoned realist. So, while Camelot might be a land of legends, it was also a place where hard truths collided with high ideals. Kennedy's early presidency was a whirlwind, a mix of triumphs and tribulations that tested the limits of charisma and courage. The Bay of Pigs was just one chapter in a story that had already captured the world's imagination. As JFK navigated these turbulent waters, he was learning on the fly, crafting a legacy that would be as complex and multifaceted as the man himself. And yet, the allure of Camelot endures, a testament to the power of narrative over nuance. The legend of JFK is one of optimism and allure, a beacon in a time of uncertainty. But beneath the veneer of myth lies the reality of a presidency marked by challenges and contradictions, a reminder that even the most charismatic leaders are, at their core, human. As we continue this journey through Kennedy's tenure, let's keep our eyes peeled for the moments that defined an era and the man who sought to lead it. The stage is set, and the next act promises to be a captivating blend of drama, diplomacy, and determination. As JFK navigated these turbulent waters of early presidency, the stage was set for what would become the most nail-biting chapter of his tenure, the Cuban Missile Crisis. Imagine the world teetering on the edge of nuclear disaster, with tension so thick you could slice it with a dull butter knife. This was October 1962, and the stakes were as high as a Cold War spy plane. Let's dive straight into the heart of this 13-day showdown. On October 14, 1962, an American U-2 spy plane snapped some rather incriminating photos over Cuba. It was like catching your neighbor building a missile silo in their backyard. Only this neighbor was the Soviet Union, and those weren't just any missiles. They were nuclear. The world was about to find out how quickly a Cold War could heat up. Enter the Executive Committee of the National Security Council, more commonly known as XCOM. Picture a group of men jammed into the White House like sardines in a can, each one more anxious than the last. These were JFK's closest advisors, and they were tasked with pulling off the ultimate tightrope walk, confronting the Soviets without turning the globe into a giant fireball. Kennedy himself was under pressure that could buckle steel. His choices were stark: do nothing and risk Soviet dominance, or launch a military strike and potentially trigger World War III. On October 22, JFK took to the airwaves, informing the American public of the Soviet missiles in Cuba. His message was clear: any attack from Cuba would be treated as an attack by the Soviet Union, bringing about a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union itself. It was the diplomatic equivalent of a high-stakes poker game, where Kennedy just went all in with a pair of twos. Over the next few days, the world held its breath. Kennedy ordered a naval blockade, quarantine, because blockades sound way too much like acts of war, around Cuba. The idea was to prevent further Soviet shipments of military equipment. This move was both bold and risky, like trying to defuse a bomb with a pair of chopsticks. The Soviet ships approached the blockade line, and for a moment it looked like disaster was inevitable. But then, like a scene from a Cold War thriller, the Soviet ships turned back. Crisis averted for now. But the drama was far from over. Behind the scenes, secret negotiations were as tense as a thriller novel. Robert F. Kennedy, the president's brother and attorney general, met with Soviet ambassador Anatoly Dobrinin. This was diplomacy at its most precarious, with each side trying to save face while avoiding mutual destruction. It was like two boxers trying to convince each other to throw in the towel without throwing a punch. The resolution came with a secret deal. The U.S. would publicly pledge not to invade Cuba and secretly agree to remove its Jupiter missiles from Turkey, which were uncomfortably close to the Soviet border. This was a classic case of, I'll scratch your back if you don't blow up mine. On October 28, Nikita Khrushchev announced that the Soviet missiles would be dismantled and removed from Cuba. The world exhaled collectively, and JFK's reputation skyrocketed as a savvy leader who had navigated the treacherous waters of diplomacy with a steady hand. But let's not get too swept up in the heroics. The Cuban Missile Crisis wasn't just a victory lap for Kennedy. It was a reminder of how close humanity had come to annihilation. It was a sobering lesson in the dangerous dance of nuclear diplomacy, where one misstep could mean game over for everyone. Through it all, humor played an unexpected role in diffusing tensions. It was gallows humor, sure, but sometimes a joke is the only thing that cuts through fear. During one particularly tense meeting, JFK quipped about the XCOM members' future memoirs, musing that the crisis would give them something to write about. It was a reminder that even at the brink, human nature finds a way to cope. As the dust settled, the myths of Camelot seemed more appealing than ever. The narrative of JFK as a cool-headed strategist was cemented, but the reality was a complex blend of luck, diplomacy, and sheer nerve. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a defining moment that showed the world just how thin the line between peace and war could be. In the end, the crisis changed not just Kennedy, but the entire Cold War landscape. It led to the establishment of a direct line of communication between Washington and Moscow, famously known as the Red Phone, though it was more teletype than telephone. It was a small step toward ensuring that the next time the world stood on the brink, cooler heads might prevail without the need for brinkmanship. So as we leave this fraught chapter of history, let's remember the razor-thin margins that defined it. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a moment when the world held its breath, and thankfully exhaled with relief rather than radioactive particles. It was a testament to the power of diplomacy, the perils of nuclear weapons, and the enduring allure of myth over reality. But most of all, it was a reminder of the precarious nature of peace, a balancing act that continues to challenge the best among us. Next up, we'll explore how this crisis impacted JFK's domestic policies and public perception, setting the stage for the remaining chapters of his life and presidency. Stay tuned, because the journey is far from over, and the echoes of Camelot continue to ripple through time. As the Cuban Missile Crisis receded into the annals of history, JFK turned his gaze inward. While he had deftly navigated the treacherous waters of international diplomacy, his domestic policies faced the kind of resistance that would make even a seasoned dog whisperer throw up their hands in despair. The America Kennedy returned to was a land of contradictions, technologically advanced, yet socially archaic. And nowhere was this more evident than in his dealings with civil rights, a topic that moved at a pace slower than a snail trying to cross molasses. Now, let's bust a popular myth. Kennedy wasn't exactly the civil rights crusader that hindsight sometimes paints him to be. Sure, he had lofty ideals, but translating those into action was akin to trying to text on a rotary phone, slow, frustrating, and not exactly effective. The reality: JFK's domestic policies were often overshadowed by his foreign policy successes, and his approach to civil rights was more reactive than proactive. In 1961, the Freedom Riders, a group of interracial activists, decided to test the Supreme Court's ruling that segregated public buses were unconstitutional. Their journey through the southern United States was like a mobile civil rights protest, with each stop along the route sparking more tension than a soap opera finale. These brave souls faced everything from angry mobs to firebombed buses, all in the name of challenging Jim Crow laws. But Kennedy's response, less than inspirational. His administration was more focused on maintaining order than championing change. He sent federal marshals not to support the Freedom Riders' cause, but to prevent the violence from escalating into a national embarrassment. Kennedy's reluctance here wasn't out of a lack of compassion, but rather a reflection of cold political calculus. The Democratic Party's stronghold in the South meant that pushing too hard on civil rights could cost him valuable support. It's a bit like trying to win a game of Jenga by removing the bottom block. Risky, to say the least. For all his charisma, JFK's approach to civil rights was cautious, a balancing act between his moral compass and the political reality of the era. Yet, the pressure cooker of social change couldn't be ignored forever. The Birmingham campaign of 1963, led by Martin Luther King Jr., marked a turning point. Picture a city as segregated as a middle school dance, with protesters facing police dogs and high-pressure hoses. The images broadcast on TV screens across the nation were impossible to ignore, even for a president adept at ducking domestic discord. The fallout from Birmingham forced Kennedy's hand. On June 11, 1963, he delivered a televised address to the nation, calling civil rights a moral issue. It was a rallying cry that resonated, a rare moment when his soaring rhetoric met the gritty reality of American life. The fires of frustration and discord are burning in every city, he declared, urging Congress to act. But here's the kicker: his proposed civil rights legislation, which would become the Civil Rights Act, stalled in Congress, meeting the kind of inertia that makes glaciers look speedy. Kennedy's assassination later that year left the heavy lifting to his successor, Lyndon B. Johnson, who picked up the torch with a vigor Kennedy had struggled to muster. And let's not forget the economic backdrop of this era, where prosperity was as unevenly distributed as the lines at a Black Friday sale. While the post-war boom had lifted many Americans into the middle class, the benefits were far from universal. African Americans, particularly in the South, faced unemployment rates twice that of their white counterparts, with poverty rates hovering around 50%. It was a stark reminder that the American dream was often more mirage than reality for minority communities. But despite the slow pace of change, Kennedy's time in the Oval Office did lay some groundwork. His Executive Order 10,925, which required government contractors to take affirmative action to ensure equal employment opportunities, was a precursor to future civil rights advances. It was a small step, like dropping a pebble into a pond, but the ripples would eventually reach far and wide. As we wade through the murky waters of JFK's domestic policy, it's clear that his legacy is a complex tapestry of idealism and pragmatism. While his international triumphs often overshadowed his domestic struggles, the seeds of change he planted would bloom in the years to come. The Kennedy era was a time of contradictions, where progress was measured not in leaps, but in cautious, calculated steps. So, as we continue this journey through the Camelot myth, let's remember that legends are often polished to a shine that reality rarely provides. Kennedy's presidency was as much about what could have been as it was about what was, a testament to the enduring allure of hope and the relentless march of history. Stay tuned, because the story of JFK is far from over, and the echoes of his time in office continue to reverberate through the corridors of power and the hearts of those who dare to dream of a better tomorrow. As we continue our deep dive into the legacy of John F. Kennedy, let's switch gears and aim for the stars, literally. JFK's presidency might have been brief, but his aspirations were anything but small. Remember that time he boldly declared America would land a man on the moon before the decade was out. That wasn't just a cocktail party boast. It was a moonshot in every sense of the word. On May 25, 1961, with a level of confidence that could sell ice to an Eskimo, Kennedy announced before Congress that the U.S. should commit to sending an American safely to the moon and back by the end of the 1960s. This wasn't just a race against the Soviets. It was a sprint towards the future, a bid to showcase American ingenuity and technological prowess at a time when Sputnik had Americans nervously glancing skyward. The Apollo program, the love child of Kennedy's vision and NASA engineering wizardry, wasn't exactly easy on the wallet. We're talking around $25 billion in 1960s dollars, which translates to about $237 billion today. That kind of cash could buy you a lot of avocado toast, or, fund a groundbreaking space mission. Kennedy's challenge wasn't just about rockets and astronauts. It was about proving that democracy and capitalism could outpace communism in the ultimate technological showdown. Yet, while Kennedy lit the fuse on this space race rocket, it's worth remembering he didn't live to see its triumphant culmination. On July 20, 1969, Neil Armstrong took that giant leap for mankind on the lunar surface, a moment broadcast to a global audience with more awe than a blockbuster premiere. The moon landing was a testament to American determination, but it was also a posthumous tribute to Kennedy's vision, a vision that, like the man himself, was cut short too soon. But what about the darker corners of Kennedy's legacy? Enter the murky world of conspiracy theories, where the line between fact and fiction is as clear as mud. The assassination of JFK on November 22, 1963, in Dallas, Texas, was a seismic shock to the nation, a where-were-you-when moment for a generation. Lee Harvey Oswald, the lone gunman according to the Warren Commission, was apprehended and then murdered on live television by Jack Ruby, a nightclub owner with a flair for drama. This was a plot twist that even the most imaginative screenwriter would struggle to sell. Theories about who really killed Kennedy have more variations than a jazz solo. Was it the Mafia, Cuban exiles, the CIA, or maybe even Lyndon B. Johnson's personal vendetta? Theories abound like popcorn at a movie theater, but what fuels them is a cocktail of distrust and the allure of the unknown. People love a mystery, and JFK's assassination offers one with more layers than an onion. In the years since, the conspiracy cottage industry has churned out books, documentaries, and even Oliver Stone's cinematic opus, JFK, which took more liberties than a rebellious teenager with a curfew. Yet, despite countless investigations, no definitive answer has emerged, leaving the debate as unresolved today as it was in 1963. Perhaps the real conspiracy lies in our refusal to accept that sometimes history's most significant events can be the result of chaos rather than conspiracy. And then there's the Camelot myth, the romantic narrative that endures despite the tarnish of reality. Coined after JFK's death by Jackie Kennedy in an interview with Life magazine, Camelot evokes a time of hope and idealism, an era when America felt like anything was possible. It's a comforting story, like a warm blanket on a cold night, but it's also a simplification. The real Kennedy administration was riddled with challenges, both foreign and domestic, from civil rights struggles to Cold War tensions. Yet, the allure of Camelot persists, a testament to how myths often outlive reality. Kennedy's charisma, his promise of a new frontier, and his untimely death all contribute to a legacy that feels larger than life. In many ways, JFK's presidency is like a great work of art, open to interpretation, endlessly analyzed, and never fully understood. The question remains, what is Kennedy's true legacy? Is it the man who inspired a nation to look to the stars, the leader who navigated nuclear brinkmanship with nerves of steel, or the flawed human being, beset by personal and political contradictions? Perhaps it's all of these things, a complex tapestry of ideals, achievements, and imperfections. What we can say for certain is that JFK's presidency left an indelible mark on American history. In just 1,000 days, he managed to ignite imaginations, confront existential threats, and spark debates that continue to this day. As we look back, it's clear that Kennedy's brief time on the world stage was anything but ordinary. It was a moment when the potential of a nation was both realized and cut short, a reminder of the power of vision and the fragility of life. So, as our journey through the life and legacy of John F. Kennedy draws to a close, let's hold on to the lessons learned. We've seen the heights of human ambition and the depths of human fallibility, the enduring power of myth, and the relentless march of history. In JFK, we find a leader whose story continues to captivate, a testament to the enduring allure of those who dare to dream big and act boldly. In the end, Kennedy's legacy is as much about what he achieved as what he inspired others to achieve. His presidency may have ended in tragedy, but the echoes of his time in office continue to reverberate, challenging us to look beyond the myths and embrace the messy, complicated reality of history. As we close the book on Camelot, let's not forget the man who dared to envision a world where the impossible became possible, and remember that while myths may fade, the impact of true leadership endures. Long before Charlemagne became the poster child for medieval Europe's greatest hits, he was just a Frankish prince with a tangled family tree and a knack for playing the medieval version of 3D chess. Born around 742 AD, give or take, because nobody back then was great at keeping birthday records, he was thrust into a world that was about as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. Now, Charlemagne's early life wasn't exactly a fairy tale. Think less Once Upon a Time, and more Game of Thrones without the dragons. His father, Pepin the Short, yes, that's his real name, and no, it wasn't a compliment, was king of the Franks. Pepin's height might have been modest, but his ambitions were anything but. When Pepin kicked the bucket in 768, he left his kingdom to Charlemagne and his brother Charlemagne, and if sibling rivalry was an Olympic sport, these two would have been gold medalists. Sharing a kingdom was about as fun as sharing a favorite toy with a sibling. Charlemagne and Carloman's relationship was frosty, to say the least. They didn't just feud over territories. They argued over everything from military campaigns to who got the bigger slice of the Gallic pie. It was like a medieval sitcom, only with more chainmail and fewer laugh tracks. But just when it seemed like these sibling shenanigans would go on forever, Carloman died in 771 under somewhat mysterious circumstances. Was it divine intervention, bad luck, or just the medieval version of a plot twist? Whatever it was, Charlemagne suddenly found himself in sole possession of the Frankish kingdom. Imagine that, a power struggle resolved by good old-fashioned mortality. With Charlemagne out of the picture, Charlemagne's ambitions took flight. He wasn't content to just rule the Franks. He wanted to unite the scattered tribes of Western Europe under one banner. It was a bit like trying to herd cats, but Charlemagne was nothing if not persistent. His first stop was the Lombards in Italy, a kingdom that had been causing headaches for popes for generations. In 774, after a swift campaign that probably left the Lombards wondering what hit them, Charlemagne added King of the Lombards to his growing list of titles. Charlemagne's political savvy was matched by his less-than-stellar fashion sense. Historical accounts suggest he wasn't exactly a trendsetter. Picture a man who preferred practical Frankish garb over the opulent robes of his contemporaries. No silk or velvet for him. Charlemagne was more about wool and leather. It's like he knew centuries before anyone else that simplicity never goes out of style. But if his fashion was unpretentious, his geographical skills were downright questionable. Despite being a king who expanded his territory significantly, Charlemagne reportedly struggled with maps. He once infamously sent an envoy to the wrong region because he couldn't keep his Burgundies straight. Hey, who hasn't mixed up their Burgundies and Burgundy wines, right? And then there was his love life. If Charlemagne's political career was a roller coaster, his romantic escapades were a full-on theme park. He married at least 4 times and had numerous concubines, with his offspring tallying up to around 18 children. His personal life was like a medieval soap opera, complete with alliances, betrayals, and more plot twists than a Shakespearean play. But behind these personal anecdotes was a man with a vision. Charlemagne wasn't just about expanding borders. He was about consolidating them. He understood that for his empire to thrive, it needed more than just a strong military. It needed a cultural and intellectual revival. This early spark would later ignite the Carolingian Renaissance, a revival of art, religion, and culture that pulled Europe out of the intellectual doldrums. In the political chess game of medieval Europe, Charlemagne was a grandmaster. He deftly maneuvered alliances, often using marriage as a diplomatic tool. His daughters, unfortunately for them, were pawns in his political schemes, married off to secure loyalties and quash uprisings. It wasn't just about expanding his empire. It was about keeping it stitched together in a patchwork quilt of fealty and fear. And let's not forget his knack for myth-making. The legend of Charlemagne has been polished over centuries, but the real man was far more complex. Sure, he was the father of Europe, but he was also a ruler who knew how to wield power with both a carrot and a very big stick. He was a king who could read, which was a rarity, but he never quite mastered the skill of riding. Apparently, even legends have their limits. Charlemagne's rise to power was as much about timing as it was about talent. He inherited a kingdom at a crossroads and had the audacity to imagine it as the center of a new European order. His early years were a blend of strategy and serendipity, a testament to the chaotic yet captivating world of medieval politics. As the legend of Charlemagne began to take shape, the man himself was busy laying the foundations for an empire that would echo through the ages. And while he may have had his flaws, who doesn't? His story is a reminder that history is often stranger and more fascinating than fiction. As Charlemagne's empire-building ambitions started gaining momentum, he quickly became the medieval equivalent of a corporate raider. But instead of hostile takeovers and boardroom battles, he used armies and alliances. His military campaigns were less about gentlemanly tournaments and more like a series of power grabs with the occasional diplomatic handshake. Let's delve into how Charles the Great, yes, that's Charlemagne's less catchy English name, expanded his empire with a mix of brutal force and shrewd diplomacy. First up, the Lombards. You might remember them as the folks who got a not-so-friendly visit from Charlemagne back in 774. This was no mere vacation to the Italian Alps, but a full-on invasion. Charlemagne marched his troops into Italy with the kind of determination that would make even the most ambitious CEO's eyes water. His campaign against the Lombards wasn't just about adding King of the Lombards to his already impressive LinkedIn profile. It was also a strategic move to secure the Pope's backing. And boy, did it work. After a swift victory, Charlemagne was crowned King of the Lombards, and the Pope got a powerful new protector. It was a win-win, unless you were a Lombard, in which case it was more of a lose-lose. Now, let's talk Saxons. Unlike the Lombards, who were already somewhat accustomed to dealing with Christian kings, the Saxons had a different set of priorities. They were fiercely pagan and not particularly keen on Charlemagne's Christianizing mission. For Charlemagne, converting the Saxons was less about spiritual enlightenment and more about consolidating power. Over the course of 3 decades, Charlemagne launched a series of campaigns against the Saxons, 18 in total, to be exact. It was the medieval equivalent of a never-ending game of whack-a-mole. Every time he thought he'd subdued them, they'd pop back up, waging guerrilla warfare from their forested homelands. The Saxon wars were costly, both in terms of human lives and royal coffers. Thousands of lives were lost, and the financial burden strained the Frankish treasury. But Charlemagne was nothing if not persistent. In 782, after a particularly bloody revolt, he ordered the massacre of Verdun, where around 500 Saxon warriors were executed in a single day. It was a brutal act that cast a long shadow over his legacy, showing that his version of spreading Christianity had a distinctly sharp edge. Despite the bloodshed, Charlemagne eventually succeeded in bringing the Saxons into the Christian fold, but at a human cost that was staggering. Next on Charlemagne's list were the Avars. These were the folks who had set up shop in what is now Hungary and were known for their impressive hoard of treasure. The Avars weren't exactly sending out invites for a friendly meet and greet, so Charlemagne decided to crash the party. Between 791 and 803, he led a series of campaigns against them, culminating in the capture of their stronghold, the Ring of the Avars. The spoils of war were immense, with the Frankish treasury receiving a significant boost from the Avar loot. It was one of those rare moments when war actually paid off, at least financially. And then there was his self-styled role as the defender of Christendom. Charlemagne wasn't just swinging his sword for territorial gains, he was also swinging it for the church. His complex relationship with the papacy had all the makings of a medieval soap opera. On the one hand, Charlemagne needed the Pope's blessing to legitimize his rule. On the other hand, the Pope needed Charlemagne's military muscle to keep the Lombards and other pesky neighbors in check. Their relationship was like a medieval buddy comedy, complete with power struggles and the occasional spat over papal invitations, or lack thereof. One not-so-holy tiff involved a dinner invitation, or rather, the absence of one. Pope Adrian I once invited Charlemagne to Rome for a feast, only for Charlemagne to find the guest list included some of his least favorite people. It was like being invited to a party and finding out your ex is also attending. Needless to say, Charlemagne wasn't thrilled, but like any good political drama, they patched things up, and their alliance continued to flourish. Charlemagne's campaigns weren't just about expanding borders. They were about solidifying his role as the ultimate power broker of Western Europe. He knew that to keep his empire intact, he needed more than just a strong sword arm. He needed allies, both ecclesiastical and temporal. And so, he maneuvered through the dangerous waters of medieval politics with the kind of finesse that would make a modern-day politician envious. But let's not get too carried away with the romance of his empire building. The reality was often harsh and bloody, with costs that went beyond the battlefield. The human toll was significant, and the financial implications were staggering. Maintaining such a vast empire required a constant influx of resources, both material and human. The Frankish economy was heavily dependent on agriculture, and the demands of war often took men away from their fields, impacting food production and the overall economy. In the grand tapestry of history, Charlemagne's campaigns were just one thread, albeit a very influential one. His ability to blend force with diplomacy set the stage for a new European order, one that would echo through the centuries. Yet, for all his achievements, the man behind the legend was as complex and flawed as any other. He was a ruler who could be both magnanimous and ruthless, a king who could inspire loyalty and fear in equal measure. As Charlemagne's empire continued to expand, so too did the challenges he faced. The logistics of managing such a sprawling realm were daunting, requiring not just military might, but also administrative genius. And while his military campaigns were often successful, they were also a reminder of the fragile balance of power that defined medieval Europe. As the story of Charlemagne unfolds, it becomes clear that the line between legend and reality is as thin as a Frankish sword. As Charlemagne's empire swelled to an impressive size, the man wasn't just sitting on a gilded throne twiddling his thumbs. Nope, he was busy laying down the groundwork for a domestic revolution that would make even the most obsessive-compulsive of us feel a bit slack. Charlemagne had a vision, and it wasn't just about bigger castles or shinier crowns. He was setting his sights on a grand goal, turning his patchwork of conquered territories into a well-oiled machine, where everything ran like clockwork, or as close to it as you could get in the 8th century. Let's start with his educational reforms. Now, before you roll your eyes and drift off thinking about dusty classrooms, consider this. Charlemagne was the medieval kingpin who decided that education was too important to be left to chance. He wasn't just about sharpening swords, but sharpening minds too. In the late 8th century, Charlemagne issued the Admonitio Generalis in 789, a decree that was essentially the medieval equivalent of a national education policy. He demanded that monasteries establish schools not just for future monks, but for every Frankish child with 2 brain cells to rub together. The curriculum, a little bit of everything: Latin, grammar, rhetoric, logic, and music. Because who doesn't need a good Gregorian chant to get through their day? Charlemagne's educational zeal was partly inspired by his own intellectual pursuits. Despite being a king who couldn't write his own name, he was a passionate learner, a fact that makes him the poster child for the whole lifelong learning movement. In fact, he surrounded himself with the greatest minds of the age, like Alcuin of York, a scholar and theologian who became Charlemagne's right-hand man in this intellectual renaissance. The idea was simple yet revolutionary. An educated populace would serve as the foundation for a stable empire. Ignorant subjects were more trouble than they were worth, after all. But education was just one cog in Charlemagne's grand machine. The man had an almost obsessive need for standardization. Why? Because nothing says orderly empire like everyone using the same set of weights and measures. His obsession with uniformity led him to standardize everything from coinage to the length of cloth. And speaking of coins, Charlemagne wasn't content with the chaotic mishmash of currency floating around his empire. In 793, he introduced a new silver currency, the denarius, which became the standard across his realm. It was a move that would make any modern economist nod in approval. Stability in currency meant stability in trade. Charlemagne's attempts to curb the black market were another stroke of pragmatic genius. The black market was the medieval equivalent of that dodgy guy selling knockoff watches from a trench coat, and it was bleeding his economy dry. Charlemagne's solution: tighten control over trade routes and markets, ensuring that taxes found their way into royal coffers rather than lining the pockets of unscrupulous merchants. He even imposed price controls on certain goods to prevent rampant inflation. But let's be real, it was about as successful as trying to herd cats. The black market was as slippery as an eel, but Charlemagne's efforts to tame it were valiant, if not always victorious. Now, onto the royal budget crisis. Even a king who expanded his empire to colossal proportions wasn't immune to financial headaches. Running an empire wasn't cheap, and Charlemagne often found himself in a fiscal pickle. Military campaigns, infrastructure projects, and that pesky thing called governance all required a steady stream of cash. It's a reminder that no matter how grand your ambitions, they're only as good as the resources backing them. Charlemagne's solution was to bolster the empire's agricultural output and levy taxes with a firm hand. It was a delicate balancing act between squeezing the peasantry just enough to fill the treasury, but not so much they revolted. As for the myth of Charlemagne as a Renaissance man, it's a narrative that's been polished to a shine over the centuries. Sure, he was a patron of the arts and a lover of learning, but it's crucial to remember that his intellectual pursuits were as much about power as they were about passion. An educated clergy and bureaucracy meant a more efficient administration, which in turn meant a stronger grip on his sprawling territories. Charlemagne's intellectual legacy was a calculated move to ensure his control was as firm as the grip he had on his sword. In the grand tapestry of Charlemagne's reign, his domestic policies were the threads that held it all together. They were the practical maneuvers of a ruler who understood that empires were built on more than just conquest. They required an infrastructure that supported growth, both economic and intellectual. Charlemagne's reforms were a testament to his vision of a united Europe, one where knowledge and standardization were the bedrock of stability. And while the romantic image of Charlemagne as the benevolent Scholar King endures, it's tempered by the reality of a ruler who knew that power came not just from the sword, but from the pen and the purse as well. As we continue to unravel the story of Charlemagne, it's clear that his legacy was a complex tapestry of ambition, intellect, and pragmatism. His domestic policies were more than just a footnote in history. They were the foundation of an empire that sought to transcend the chaos of its time. And while the legend of Charlemagne has been burnished by the passage of centuries, the reality of his reign is as fascinating as it is flawed. As we delve deeper into his story, the line between the myth and the man becomes even more blurred, revealing a ruler who was as human as any of us, grappling with the timeless challenges of leadership and legacy. As we delve deeper into Charlemagne's world, it's time to swap the battlefield for the scriptorium. Charlemagne wasn't just about swinging swords and stamping out rebellions. He was also penning the prologue to what historians like to call the Carolingian Renaissance. It's a term that sounds like a fancy wine, but was actually a cultural and intellectual revival that put the wow back in the dark ages. Now, before we start handing out gold stars and laurel wreaths, let's unpack what this so-called Renaissance really entailed. Picture a court bustling with scholars, artists and scribes, their quills scratching away like it's the hardest new trend since chainmail. Charlemagne's court became the medieval version of a TED talk, with intellectual heavyweights like Alcuin of York dropping knowledge bombs left and right. These guys were the OG influencers, and they didn't even need Instagram filters to look smart. But hold your horses. Let's not get too carried away with the grandeur. Despite what the polished legends suggest, the Carolingian Renaissance wasn't exactly the glittering beacon of enlightenment it's often cracked up to be. Sure, there was a flurry of activity. Manuscripts were copied, art was commissioned, and Latin was polished like a shiny old penny. Yet, for all its intellectual flair, this Renaissance was more about preserving the past than creating the future. It was like medieval Europe had hit the pause button on progress and decided to binge-watch the classics instead. Take the standardized script, for example, that emerged from this period, Carolingian minuscule. This wasn't just a pretty new font for medieval manuscripts. It was a game-changer. You can thank Charlemagne's scribes for creating a legible script that made reading Latin a tad less like deciphering a bad doctor's handwriting. It was the kind of reform that made you want to hug your favorite monk. But don't, because that would be awkward and possibly against the rules. Now, let's talk about art. Charlemagne's patronage led to the production of some stunning illuminated manuscripts and religious iconography. But before you start picturing the Louvre stuffed with Carolingian masterpieces, remember that these works were more function than flourish. They weren't about artistic expression. They were tools for religious instruction and propaganda, holy power points, if you will. The art served the church's agenda, reinforcing Charlemagne's role as the protector of Christendom. It was less about aesthetic innovation and more about making sure everyone got the divine memo. And just like any good myth, the narrative of Charlemagne as a patron of the arts has been polished to a fine sheen over the centuries. The reality, his support for the arts, was as much about solidifying his power and religious authority as it was about cultural enrichment. While his court may have been a hive of intellectual activity, for the average Joe, or Johann, ploughing fields in the Carolingian Empire, life was less about poetry and more about pestilence. Most of Charlemagne's subjects were more likely to encounter a plague than a poet, their daily grind defined by the harsh realities of medieval life. The gap between the high ideals of Charlemagne's court and the lived experience of his subjects was as wide as the Rhine. While the elite dabbled in philosophy and theology, the peasants were preoccupied with more pressing concerns, like surviving crop failures, disease outbreaks, and the occasional Viking raid. For them, the Carolingian Renaissance was about as relevant as a 3rd century papyrus scroll. So, how much credit does Charlemagne deserve for this so-called Renaissance? It's a mixed bag. On one hand, he genuinely valued learning and sought to revive classical knowledge. On the other, his motivations were as political as they were pious. Educated clergy and government officials meant a more efficient administration, which, in turn, meant a tighter grip on his empire. This was less about altruism and more about empire building 101. Charlemagne's court was a microcosm of medieval Europe's intellectual aspirations, but the reality for most of his subjects was a harsh contrast. The Carolingian Renaissance may have lit a spark in the halls of power, but it barely flickered in the huts and hamlets across his realm. This wasn't a cultural revolution. It was a calculated effort to bolster a fragile empire with the tools of the mind. As we continue to explore the legacy of Charlemagne, it's clear that the emperor was a master of myth-making, crafting a narrative that has endured through the ages. Yet, beneath the polished veneer of legend lies a story that's as complex and contradictory as the man himself, a ruler who knew that power was as much about perception as it was about reality. Charlemagne's court was a microcosm of medieval Europe's intellectual aspirations, but the reality for most of his subjects was a harsh contrast. The Carolingian Renaissance may have lit a spark in the halls of power, but it barely flickered in the huts and hamlets across his realm. This wasn't a cultural revolution. It was a calculated effort to bolster a fragile empire with the tools of the mind. As we continue to explore the legacy of Charlemagne, it's clear that the emperor was a master of myth-making, crafting a narrative that has endured through the ages. Yet, beneath the polished veneer of legend lies a story that's as complex and contradictory as the man himself, a ruler who knew that power was as much about perception as it was about reality. And speaking of perception, let's talk about Charlemagne's crowning moment, literally. Fast forward to Christmas Day, 800 AD. In a scene that could have been ripped from a medieval scriptwriter's fever dream, Charlemagne found himself in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, looking every bit the part of a reluctant yet radiant monarch. As the story goes, Pope Leo Roman III, that wily old fox, plopped a crown on Charlemagne's head, declaring him Holy Roman Emperor. Surprise, or was it? This was less a spontaneous gesture of divine inspiration and more of a meticulously planned PR coup. But let's not kid ourselves. This was less about holiness and more about politics. By crowning Charlemagne, Pope was essentially saying, "Hey, Europe, we've got a new sheriff in town, and he's got the Vatican's seal of approval." It was a move that sent shivers down the spines of Byzantine emperors who weren't exactly thrilled about this new contender for the title of Roman torchbearer. And for Charlemagne, it was the ultimate endorsement, a seal of legitimacy that made him the medieval version of a certified influencer. Yet the irony here is thicker than a Frankish stew. Charlemagne, who had spent decades carving out an empire with blood and iron, was now being hailed as the savior of Christendom. It's a bit like hiring the fox to guard the henhouse. But hey, in a world where might often made right, Charlemagne's crowning was the cherry on top of his Imperial sundae, a tactical masterstroke that cemented his status as the head honcho of Western Europe. It was as much about consolidating power as it was about divine right, a blend of faith and force that would echo throughout medieval history. But what about the empire he left behind? Charlemagne's final years were more about consolidation than expansion. He spent his twilight years at Aachen, his favorite seat of power, tinkering with administrative reforms and trying to ensure a smooth succession. He even issued the Ordinatio Imperii in 806, a plan that divided his empire among his sons, an attempt to keep things orderly when he shuffled off this mortal coil. Spoiler alert, it didn't work out as planned. When Charlemagne died in 814, at the ripe old age of 72, his empire was a patchwork quilt of territories held together by a very frayed thread. The empire's eventual fragmentation was as inevitable as a medieval banquet ending with indigestion. Charlemagne's grand vision of a united Christendom was more dream than reality, a fragile construct that unraveled like a poorly knitted scarf. His successor, Louis the Pious, inherited an empire with more cracks than a cathedral's stained glass window. Internal squabbles, external threats, and the good old-fashioned medieval pastime of sibling rivalry conspired to tear apart the empire Charlemagne had painstakingly pieced together. By 843, the Treaty of Verdun had carved up the Carolingian Empire into 3 distinct realms, setting the stage for the future nation-states of Europe. Charlemagne's dream of a unified Europe was as shattered as a draught goblet at a royal feast. The empire he built with sweat and steel was now a footnote in history, a reminder that even the mightiest of empires can crumble under the weight of their own ambitions. Yet, the echoes of his reign reverberated through the centuries, shaping the political and cultural landscape of medieval Europe. So, what do we make of Charlemagne's legacy today? He's become a cultural icon, the medieval equivalent of a rock star. His name is synonymous with the idea of a united Europe, even if that unity was more myth than reality. He's been painted as a warrior saint and a tyrant, a scholar king and a ruthless conqueror. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between. Charlemagne was a ruler who understood the power of image, a master of spin long before the term was coined. His story is a reminder that history is as much about narrative as it is about facts. In modern Europe, Charlemagne's legacy is both revered and scrutinized. The Charlemagne Prize, awarded annually in Aachen, honors those who have contributed to European unity, a nod to the emperor's unrealized dream. Yet, for all the accolades, it's crucial to remember the human cost of his conquests, the blood and toil that paved the way for his empire. Charlemagne's story is a tapestry woven with threads of ambition, intellect, and ruthlessness, a complex narrative that continues to captivate and confound. In the end, Charlemagne's legacy is a testament to the enduring allure of myth. He's a larger-than-life figure whose exploits have been embellished and romanticized, a symbol of power and perseverance that transcends the ages. Yet, beneath the legend lies the reality of a man grappling with the timeless challenges of empire building, a ruler whose story is as relevant today as it was over a millennium ago. As we close the chapter on Charlemagne, we're left with a reminder that history is not just a collection of dates and deeds, but a rich tapestry of human experience, a story of dreams and disappointments, of glory and grit. Galileo Galilei, a name synonymous with telescopes and heresy, kicked off his life in 1564 under the seemingly romantic arches of Pisa, Italy, where the Leaning Tower was just a local architectural oopsie, not the global tourist trap it is today. Born into a family that had more strings attached to their finances than their musical instruments, Galileo's early days were a symphony of economic struggle. His dad, Vincenzo Galilei, harbored dreams of a music career that would set Florence's Medici court alight. Spoiler alert, it didn't. Vincenzo's melodies didn't exactly hit the Renaissance Billboard charts, leaving the family to play out their lives in the less-than-ideal key of financial instability. Galileo's early forays into music weren't exactly chart-toppers either. The young Galilei tried his hand at the lute, probably thinking he could strum his way out of monetary woes. But much like Vincenzo's career, Galileo's lute skills plucked more than a few wrong notes. It turns out that the young man's true harmony lay not in music, but in mathematics, a passion that would later have the church seeing red, and at times, Galileo seeing stars, quite literally. When the time came for higher education, Vincenzo, who was likely fed up with serenading poverty, pushed Galileo toward the University of Pisa with the hope that he'd become a doctor. Medicine, a stable career that promised more than a few coins in the purse, a logical choice for a father who'd learned to distrust the arts as a financial safety net. But Galileo, ever the rebel, wasn't ready to swallow that pill. Instead, he was drawn to the world of numbers and theorems, which, let's be honest, probably seemed like a more exciting prospect than diagnosing the Renaissance equivalent of the common cold. University life for Galileo was a whirlwind of academic interests and financial woes. He enrolled in 1581, and while his father's purse strings were tighter than a lute string, Galileo's mind was expanding exponentially. Pisa's university was a place where many of the era's brightest minds congregated, though they were often too busy arguing over Aristotelian philosophy to notice that the earth wasn't flat. Galileo, however, was more interested in the mathematical dispute than in memorizing the humors of the human body. It was during these formative years that he stumbled upon the pendulum's isochronism, a concept that would later tick-tock its way into horological history. But here's the kicker: Galileo dropped out. That's right, the father of modern science did the classic college dropout routine. By 1585, the financial strain was too much, and he left the university without a degree. In an era when dropping out wasn't exactly a rite of passage for tech billionaires, it was a hefty gamble. Yet Galileo's fascination with the world of mathematics never dimmed. He spent the next few years self-studying, teaching, and eventually developing the kind of ideas that would make future generations sit up and take notice. Galileo's early life was a heady mix of ambition, rebellion, and sheer grit set against the backdrop of Renaissance Italy, a period that was as rich in scientific curiosity as it was poor in reliable healthcare. His journey from would-be doctor to mathematics maverick wasn't just a personal triumph, but a reflection of the era's shifting tides. The Renaissance was a time when old ideas were being challenged and new sciences were beginning to take root, even if it meant incurring the wrath of the powerful institutions that preferred their world flat and their stars fixed in the firmament. In these early years, Galileo was setting the stage for a life that would be as tumultuous as it was groundbreaking. He'd eventually clash with the Catholic Church, but for now, he was a young man with a head full of numbers and a family history that was less about celestial harmony and more about economic discord. His story is one of transformation, not through divine revelation, but through relentless questioning and a refusal to settle for the status quo. In this way, Galileo was not just a product of his time, but a catalyst for the scientific revolution that would forever alter humanity's view of the cosmos. With Galileo's head full of rebellious ideas and his wallet perpetually empty, he needed a fresh start. Enter the University of Padua, the 1592 academic hotspot where Galileo would hang his hat for the next 18 years. Think of it as the Silicon Valley of the Renaissance, teeming with the intellectual fervor that would prove fertile ground for his groundbreaking explorations. Padua wasn't just an academic escape, it was a ticket to financial stability. As a professor, Galileo earned 180 florins a year, which in today's terms meant he could finally upgrade from ramen noodles to a full-on Renaissance feast. Right off the bat, Galileo wasn't content with rehashing Aristotle's greatest hits. He had bigger fish to fry, or rather more complex motions to unravel. Enter the Leaning Tower of Pisa experiment. Now, the official story goes that Galileo climbed the world's most famous architectural mishap and dropped two spheres of different masses to demonstrate that they hit the ground simultaneously. This supposedly shattered Aristotle's long-held belief that heavier objects fall faster than lighter ones. But here's the kicker. There's no concrete evidence he actually did this. It might just be the Renaissance equivalent of a viral meme. Still, whether or not Galileo made that dramatic drop, he definitely made waves with his ideas about motion, laying the groundwork for Newton's apple-flavored epiphanies a few decades later. While Galileo was busy myth-busting, he was also moonlighting as a military consultant. His weapon of choice, the military compass, aka the geometric and military compass. Forget your compass from high school geometry class. This was a multi-tool on steroids, a precursor to the Swiss Army knife. It could calculate everything from artillery range to fortification design. In short, it was a big deal for the Venetian fleet, who were more than happy to pay Galileo for his mathematical wizardry. This wasn't just a nifty gadget. It was a lifeline for Galileo, putting ducats in his pocket and bread on the table. By the late 16th century, Galileo was ready to turn his gaze skyward. Enter the telescope, a device he didn't invent but certainly perfected. In 1609, upon hearing about a Dutch spectacle maker's little innovation, Galileo whipped together his own version, upping the magnification from a modest 3x to an impressive 20x. It's the equivalent of taking a blurry selfie and cranking it up to HD video. With this new tool, Galileo set his sights on the heavens, and boy, did he see more than just twinkling lights. Galileo's celestial discoveries were nothing short of cosmic game-changers. He spotted craters on the moon, revealing it wasn't the smooth orb of perfection everyone thought it was. In 1610, he discovered 4 moons orbiting Jupiter, Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto, proving that not everything in the universe revolved around Earth. This was the celestial equivalent of finding out your high school nemesis had secretly been rooting for you all along. These observations were like a cosmic wedgie for the geocentric model, and they propelled Galileo into the scientific limelight. But here's where the plot thickens. Galileo's telescopic triumphs ruffled more than a few feathers. The Catholic Church, which had a vested interest in keeping Earth at the center of the universe, wasn't thrilled. To them, Galileo's discoveries were like finding out your favorite bedtime story had been ghost-written by a heretic. Yet, for all the controversy, Galileo's work in Padua was a testament to his insatiable curiosity and relentless pursuit of truth, even when it led him into troubled waters. As Galileo navigated the tides of academic innovation and ecclesiastical scrutiny, he stood on the precipice of change, both personal and cosmic. The discoveries that filled his telescope's lens would soon spill over into books and debates that would rock the foundation of established belief systems. And while the Catholic Church might have hoped to keep the universe neatly ordered, Galileo's revelations were about to send shockwaves through both the heavens and the halls of power. His story was far from over, just as the Renaissance was far from running out of its own revolutionary steam. Galileo's revelations weren't just a gentle nudge to the geocentric model. They were more like a cosmic cannonball through the stained glass window of established thought. His observations of Jupiter's moons in 1610 weren't just celestial trivia. They were a giant leap for heliocentrism, a model that suggested the sun, not Earth, was the center of the universe. This was a direct challenge to the Earth-centered universe that had been the church-sanctioned story for centuries. It was like telling a die-hard flat-earther that the photos from space aren't just CGI. When Galileo published Sidereus Nuncius in 1610, he wasn't just writing a book, he was dropping a literary bombshell. The title, which translates to Starry Messenger, promised revelations from the heavens that would shake the scientific community to its core. In just about 60 pages, Galileo laid out his telescopic findings with the kind of enthusiasm you'd expect from someone who just discovered the universe's best-kept secrets. This was no dry academic tome. It was a bestseller that spread like wildfire across Europe. And no, it wasn't because people were hoping for a steamy subplot with vampires or wizards. The book was an instant hit because it promised a new way of seeing the world, or rather, the cosmos. But why did Sidereus Nuncius cause such a stir? Well, for starters, Galileo's detailed sketches of the moon showed it wasn't the perfect celestial body Aristotle had assured everyone it was. Those craters and mountains suggested a moon more akin to a pockmarked teenager than a pristine orb. And then there were Jupiter's moons, 4 little darts that danced around the giant planet, blatantly ignoring the Earth-centered dance floor everyone else was supposed to be on. These were the Galilean moons, named in honor of their discoverer, and they were a stark reminder that some celestial bodies had their own priorities, namely, not revolving around Earth. Here's where things get spicy. Galileo's observations didn't just earn him accolades, they also attracted the attention of the powerful Medici family. The Medicis were essentially the Kardashians of Renaissance Italy, minus the reality TV show, but with a lot more influence over the arts and sciences. Cosimo Roman II de' Medici, the Grand Duke of Tuscany, saw the potential in associating his family's name with these groundbreaking discoveries. In a masterstroke of PR, Galileo named the moons of Jupiter the Medicean stars. It was a brilliant move. Galileo got a powerful patron, and the Medicis got their name immortalized in the heavens, which was a pretty sweet deal in the days before Instagram followers. This patronage was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it provided Galileo with the financial support and protection he desperately needed. Being backed by the Medicis was like having a high-powered lawyer on retainer. It meant you could push boundaries without fearing immediate retribution. On the other hand, it also meant Galileo had to navigate the treacherous waters of politics and patronage, where the wrong move could cost him everything. The Medicis expected results, and Galileo had to keep the scientific discoveries coming even as the church's scrutiny intensified. But let's not paint Galileo as an innocent victim in all this. He was as ambitious as he was brilliant, and he knew how to play the game. By dedicating his discoveries to the Medici family, secured a position that allowed him to focus on his research without the constant threat of poverty or persecution. Yet, this relationship came with strings attached. The Medicis wanted their investment to pay off, and Galileo had to deliver the goods, both in terms of scientific breakthroughs and in navigating the increasingly contentious relationship with the Church. And speaking of the Church, they weren't exactly thrilled about Galileo's celestial revelations. The Catholic Church, with its vested interest in maintaining the geocentric model, saw Galileo's discoveries as a threat to both their theological doctrine and their authority. It was one thing to debate philosophical ideas in the halls of academia, but it was another to publish a best-selling book that called into question the very foundation of the universe as the Church understood it. Galileo wasn't just challenging scientific norms. He was poking a very large, very powerful bear with a very sharp stick. The tension between Galileo and the Church was like a slow-motion car crash, inevitable and increasingly disastrous. The more Galileo observed, the more he wrote, and the more he wrote, the more he put himself in the crosshairs of ecclesiastical authority. Yet, for all the pressure, he remained undeterred, driven by a relentless curiosity and a belief that the truth of the universe was worth any cost, even if that meant standing alone against the tide of tradition. In the midst of all this, Galileo's work and his Medici-backed protection created a unique dynamic. On one side, he had the intellectual freedom to explore, to question, and to push the boundaries of human knowledge. On the other, he faced the ever-present threat of condemnation from a church that preferred its universe neat and orderly, with Earth firmly at the center. This was a time when scientific inquiry was as dangerous as it was exhilarating, and Galileo was the lightning rod for both the storm of innovation and the backlash it provoked. As Galileo continued to chart the heavens and write about his findings, he was not just altering the course of science, he was also reshaping the very fabric of society. His work was a testament to the power of curiosity and the enduring human desire to understand our place in the cosmos. And while the Medicis provided a shield against immediate danger, the looming shadow of the Church's disapproval was a reminder that Galileo's journey was far from over. The stakes were high, and the next act in his life promised to be as tumultuous as the last, with the potential for both unparalleled triumphs and unprecedented challenges. As Galileo peered through his telescope, unraveling the celestial dance above, he found himself in a cosmic tango that was as dangerous as it was exciting. The Church, with all its authority, wasn't exactly thrilled about his heliocentric leanings. You see, back in the early 1600s, suggesting that Earth wasn't the universe's VIP section was akin to claiming avocado toast, is the secret to immortality, provocative, to say the least. Enter 1616, the year Galileo's celestial musings collided head-on with an ecclesiastical reality check. The Catholic Church, ever the cosmic gatekeeper, issued a formal warning to our stargazing protagonist. The Holy Office had decided that Copernican heliocentrism was a no-go, branding it formally heretical. Galileo was told to cool it with the sun-centered theories or face the theological equivalent of being unfriended, excommunication. It was less of a let's agree to disagree and more of a quit it or else. Here's the kicker. Galileo wasn't just a scientist. He was a master of rhetoric and persuasion. He attempted to navigate this celestial minefield with the finesse of a tightrope walker over a pit of hungry alligators. He continued to explore and discuss heliocentrism, but with the subtlety of a Renaissance diplomat. In 1624, he penned a letter to a former student, Benedetto Caselli, arguing that the Bible was not a science textbook. Instead, it was a guide to salvation, leaving earthly matters, like planetary orbits, to the scientists. It was a clever, albeit risky, move to keep the conversation going without stepping on too many ecclesiastical toes. Fast forward to 1632, and Galileo was back in the spotlight with his publication, Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems. This work was Galileo's magnum opus, a literary masterpiece disguised as a casual conversation between three characters: Salviati, the Copernican advocate; Sagredo, the neutral party; and Simplicio, the Aristotelian stalwart. And oh boy, did Simplicio bear more than a passing resemblance to a certain Pope Urban Roman VIII. Now, let's just say Pope Urban Roman VIII wasn't exactly rolling in the aisles with laughter. The Pope, who had been a supporter of Galileo in the past, saw the character of Simplicio as a caricature, a not-so-subtle jab at his own views. The book's conversational style, while engaging, was the Renaissance equivalent of a late-night talk show roast, with the Pope playing the role of the unwitting guest of honor. And as history has shown, making fun of powerful people is a bit like trying to give a cat a bath, messy and often regrettable. Galileo's dialogue wasn't just a book, it was a powder keg. On one hand, it was a brilliant exposition of the heliocentric model's virtues, backed by Galileo's sharp wit and undeniable intellect. On the other hand, it was a direct challenge to the established order, a scientific manifesto that dared to question the very foundation of the Church's cosmology. The stakes were astronomically high. The fallout was as swift as it was severe. By 1633, Galileo was summoned to Rome, facing the Roman Inquisition. His trial was the trial of the century, the courtroom drama that had all the makings of a blockbuster film: power, science, betrayal, and the looming threat of heresy. The Church couldn't abide by Galileo's challenge to its authority, and Galileo, ever the rebel, couldn't stomach the suppression of truth. In the end, Galileo was found vehemently suspect of heresy, a verdict that came with house arrest for the remainder of his days. The Church forced him to recant his heliocentric views, a bitter pill to swallow for a man whose life had been dedicated to uncovering the universe's mysteries. Legend has it that, after his recantation, Galileo muttered, "E per si muo," and yet it moves, an assertion of his unwavering belief in the Copernican model. Although this tale has the ring of myth, it captures the defiant spirit of a man who refused to let dogma eclipse discovery. Galileo's trial was a turning point, not just for him, but for the relationship between science and religion. It marked a moment when the pursuit of knowledge clashed headlong with the rigid structures of authority, a reminder that while the heavens may be vast, human understanding is often constrained by earthly politics. The economic context of this period was just as complex as the celestial mechanics Galileo so enjoyed. The Church, a formidable economic power, had a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. With vast lands and wealth, the Church's influence was as much about economics as it was about theology. Galileo's challenge was not just to an idea, but to an institution that wielded significant financial clout. And let's not forget the broader social and political backdrop. The 30 Years' War was raging, a conflict that was as much about religious supremacy as it was about territorial gain. In this turbulent climate, Galileo's scientific assertions weren't just academic musings. They were seen as political statements, potential sparks in an already volatile powder keg. Galileo's story is one of relentless curiosity in the face of daunting opposition. It's about a man who dared to look up at the stars and see beyond the accepted narratives, challenging not only the heavens, but also the earthly powers that sought to keep them in check. His life was a testament to the enduring power of knowledge and the human spirit's unyielding quest to understand the cosmos. As Galileo settled into his house arrest, the world outside continued to spin, both literally and metaphorically. The seeds of the scientific revolution he helped plant would grow, shaking the foundations of established thought long after his time. And while the Church may have won the battle, the war for scientific understanding was just beginning, with Galileo's story serving as a beacon for future generations of thinkers and dreamers. So, what does Galileo's tale tell us about the human condition? Perhaps it's this: the pursuit of truth is fraught with peril, but it is also an adventure of unparalleled significance. In a world where the stars are no longer fixed points in the sky, but gateways to endless possibilities, Galileo's legacy reminds us that the universe is vast, ever-changing, and ripe for exploration. And despite the risks, the quest for knowledge is a journey worth taking, no matter the obstacles in our way. As Galileo faced the twilight of his life, confined to the walls of his villa in Arcetri, just outside Florence, he found himself in a peculiar predicament. Here was a man who had spent his life peering into the vastness of space, now reduced to the view from his window. Under house arrest from 1633 until his death in 1642, Galileo's forced isolation was a bitter reminder of the Church's heavy hand. His crime, daring to suggest that perhaps, just perhaps, the Earth wasn't the universe's favorite child. Yet even in confinement, Galileo's mind roamed free, fueled by the same insatiable curiosity that had driven him to question the very nature of the cosmos. The irony of his circumstances wasn't lost on him, or us, for that matter. Here was a man, once the world's most famous astronomer, gradually losing his sight. By 1638, Galileo was nearly blind, a cruel twist of fate for someone whose life's work revolved around seeing beyond the ordinary. It's like a world-class chef developing a taste disorder, tragic and absurd. But let's not get too lost in poetic tragedy. Galileo's blindness didn't extinguish his intellectual fire. Despite his failing eyesight, he continued to write and correspond with other scientists. His discourses and mathematical demonstrations relating to two new sciences, smuggled out of Italy and published in the Netherlands in 1638, was a testament to his enduring brilliance. This work laid the groundwork for classical mechanics, a field that Isaac Newton would later build upon. Galileo's theories on motion and strength of materials were a far cry from the celestial disputes that had landed him in hot water, but they were no less revolutionary. Back in the realms of ecclesiastical power, the church might have thought they'd put Galileo in his place, but history had other plans. The scientific community, spurred on by Galileo's findings, was entering an era of enlightenment that no amount of doctrine could dim. The heliocentric model, championed by Copernicus and aggressively validated by Galileo, was an idea whose time had come. Over the following decades and centuries, it will be proven and accepted as the foundation of modern astronomy. The Church's insistence on geocentrism was like clinging to a VHS tape in an age of streaming services, quaint but ultimately obsolete. Galileo's trial, while a personal tragedy, became a symbol of the struggle between reason and authority, a dramatic showdown that highlighted the dangers of dogma in the face of discovery. The economic and political context of the time only amplified the stakes. The Catholic Church, a colossal institution with both spiritual and temporal power, was reluctant to see its worldview challenged. The 30 Years' War was still casting a shadow over Europe, and any challenge to religious orthodoxy was viewed through a lens of political instability. Galileo wasn't just a scientist. He was a lightning rod for change. Fast forward a few centuries, and the irony of Galileo's story only deepens. In 1992, the Vatican finally admitted it had been wrong to condemn him. Yes, you heard that right. 359 years after the fact, the Church officially forgave Galileo. Talk about holding a grudge. It was a moment that would have surely amused Galileo had he been around to see it. Imagine receiving an apology centuries after a parking ticket. Yet, this belated recognition was a testament to Galileo's enduring legacy. His ideas had outlasted not only his own lifetime, but also the dogmatic frameworks that sought to suppress them. Galileo's tale isn't just a story of one man's genius. It's a narrative about the relentless pursuit of understanding, even when it means standing in the face of overwhelming opposition. He showed us that the universe is infinitely more complex and wondrous than we might ever truly comprehend. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. His work laid the foundation for modern science, earning him the title of the father of modern science, a moniker well-deserved, given his contributions to physics, astronomy, and the scientific method. In the end, Galileo's life reminds us that while the path of discovery is fraught with peril, it is also paved with the potential for profound change. His story is a clarion call to all who dare to question the status quo and seek truth in a world that often prefers comfortable ignorance. So, as we close the book on Galileo, let's remember that the universe is vast, full of mystery and possibilities, and it's up to us to keep looking up, even when the ground beneath us seems determined to hold us down. And so, with a nod to Galileo, let's chuckle at the absurdity of it all. A man who saw the universe more clearly than anyone before him, brought to heel by those who feared what he might find. But in the grand scheme, it was Galileo who had the last laugh, his ideas illuminating the path for generations to come, proving that knowledge, like the stars, is boundless and irrepressible.